181. A piece of kryptonite in each hand. You. Lobo's body trembled at the words as if struck by lightning. He glared at David with a fiendish stare, pointing at him for a long time, unable to speak. What? Didn't you hear me? David asked, his expression gone cold. Lobo had been unbearably arrogant before, unkillable, obnoxious, utterly repulsive. But the tables had turned. Lobo feared neither death nor pain, but his pride was everything. If anyone in the universe saw him humiliated like this, it would be worse than dying. Heard. I heard it, Lobo growled. He bristled, furious but careful not to speak too rashly. Purple Lantern. What? What do you want me to do? I can turn around and leave right now, abandon the mission to capture you, if that's what you want. Do you really think you can capture me, Lobo? David asked, his gaze flicking to the horizon. In the distance, Ryan and the others, agents Brainiac had sent, had finally been located. Realizing both sides could not afford mutual slaughter, they crossed the lunar plain and came straight at David and his companions. Dimax, a leopard-headed brute among the four, sneered as he ran like lightning. I said this wasn't necessary. That Lobo is no match for our primary target, he spat as he covered the ground with almost impossible speed. In the end, we'll have to do the job ourselves. Be careful, Ryan, the leader, said coolly as he flew. The primary target is stronger than the Master's data indicated. Parallax, dinosaur-headed, licked the stinger at the tip of her tentacle as they charged. I wonder how much poison he can stand, she said. The last of the four, Flower of Paradise, with wings that threw off light and flame and an expression that revealed no gender, watched with cold, merciless eyes, silent as a machine built to kill. There are a few others over there. Deal with them. A few figures appeared on the horizon. David folded his arms and, with a casual flick of his chin toward Lobo, said as if ordering a lackey, "Oh, Lobo never takes orders from anyone." Lobo had half expected trouble, but he hadn't expected David's attitude to be so infuriating. He leapt into a blind rage. Oh, so are you going to press that button or what? David raised an eyebrow. Energy from his green lantern ring condensed into a small, glowing button. In truth, aside from Earth, he had no way to instantly broadcast compromising photos of Lobo across the universe. But Lobo didn't know that. He would never believe that a man who knew both Lobo and the Lantern Corps and who carried a green lantern ring could be a bumpkin who'd never left their tiny stellar system. Lobo suspected David had bought the ring on some black market. Those old corrupt gnomes of the Corps wouldn't allow a member to use lethal force under normal circumstances. Damn it, just this once, Lobo snarled. Seeing David about to press the button, Lobo roared and charged at the newcomers, chain in hand, determined to move before whatever leverage David held could be unleashed. David only folded his arms and scoffed softly. Once is enough for a second time. He had him now. He would hang on to this leverage for as long as it took. Clark watched from the side, slightly stunned. He truly hadn't expected a monster that survived the sun to be cowed like this. You monsters, where did you come from? On the lunar plain, Lobo swung his chain with a shriek that cut through the air, forcing the approaching figures to hesitate. His eyes were fierce. You were watching when old Lobo and that purple lantern were fighting, weren't you? It wasn't likely a coincidence that someone had been hired to capture a target on this moon, only for another group hostile to that target to show up. But Lobo didn't care about motives. He only cared that they'd seen him being made to look like a fool by that man in purple. That alone was worth blood. To the death for old Lobo, Dimax snarled, crouching like a leopard, every muscle primed to unleash cataclysmic force. Leave this one to me, Lobo barked. You go capture the target. I'll join you once I finish him. Dimax slammed his paw into the ground, cracking the lunar soil. He launched like a cannonball, claws flashing. He struck Lobo with a dozen rapid blows, each aimed like a predator at a vital point. Lobo dodged twice, then stopped dodging. A brutal wound tore across his neck, but he didn't seem to care. He brought his chain around, its curved hook slicing through the air. Dimax, blessed with leopard-like speed and talons sharper than Kryptonian steel, evaded the swing and pounced again. The impact hit Lobo like a mountain, sending him flying and pinning him to the ground. Dimax opened a maw full of saber-toothed fangs and snapped at Lobo's throat. Lobo shoved his arm into the beast's mouth, unfazed as bones in his arm crunched and blood spattered. Your breath smells worse than mine after a hangover, Lobo taunted, and then he hammered a vicious uppercut into Damax's abdomen, sending the Catman rocketing into the sky. He rose, shook his arm where exposed bones showed through deep gashes, grinned, and lunged again. Little kitty, let old Lobo pull out your teeth. Still calling yourself the universe's top bounty hunter, Damax grunted between attacks. A waste, but you've got a big mouth. They collided again, two berserk beasts locked in a savage struggle. Meanwhile, Ryan and the other two bypassed Lobo and surged toward David and Clark. Since Brainiac had sent them, Clark felt no need to hold back. He flashed like a bolt of lightning and threw a punch. Kryptonian, surrender! Flower of Paradise clasped her hands. Energy bloomed from her palms like a blossoming flower. Beams slammed into Clark and shoved him back. Burning heat licked at his skin. Clark dodged the beam, clenched his fist, and prepared to charge again. Wait! David called from the ground, and Clark hovered, turning his head. Look at their wrists. Clark followed David's gesture. Each of the three attackers wore a wristband set with a small, glowing green stone. Kryptonite, Clark said, stunned. Each of them, three of Brainiac's operatives, carried a piece of kryptonite. You're only noticing that now? David's tone was mildly reproachful. Don't forget where kryptonite comes from. Kryptonite was a remnant of Krypton's destruction. Some of it fell to Earth with Clark long ago. Now there was essentially none left on Earth, only trace byproducts. But across the universe, it was different. When Krypton blew, Brainiac was there. He bottled Kandor like a collectible, David explained. Conservatively, he has enough kryptonite to fill a lake. If Brainiac himself had come, he wouldn't have bothered exploiting a Kryptonian weakness. But when he sent henchmen to capture a target, he did. David glanced back at the brutal fight unfolding between Lobo and Damax, surprised at the caliber of the fighters before him. Any one of them is strong enough to hold their own with Lobo, at least for a moment. I wonder where Brainiac found subordinates like these. Ryan and the others looked at Clark with pure hatred in their eyes. They were here to capture him, or at least that had been their primary objective. Kryptonian, Earthling, do you know by whose hand you will fall today? Ryan said, hovering in midair. Her skin was deathly pale. She spoke with the flat, detached tone of a grim reaper. We were made by Kryptonians, she added, mockery curling her lips. They took embryos from powerful races across different universes, altered them again and again, poured their ambitions and their madness into us. We were created to be unrecognizable. Fate had been perverse enough to make them the ones to finish off the last free Kryptonian. Our purpose is to complete dangerous missions even you Kryptonians could not. Clark's expression stiffened. He'd assumed these people simply looked and acted this way. But products of Kryptonian genetic engineering? He found that thought chilling. I don't want to argue about the crimes of some Kryptonians, he said instead, clenching his fists. But Brainiac is the universe's foremost madman. He's destroyed countless worlds. Are you sure you want to be helping him? David's expression shifted at the revelation. It wasn't implausible. Kryptonians had made other monstrous bioweapons before. Doomsday had been one. Genetic engineering at that level produced terrifying, unstoppable things. It was our master who woke us up, Ryan said, voice flat. He optimized our genes and made us stronger. For his will, we will give our lives. Parallax's barbed tentacles whiplashed forward. The kryptonite bracelets she wore spat out radiation that smeared across the air and struck Clark. His steel body wavered instantly, and he staggered. Her long, stinger-tipped limb darted for his chest. They watched with cold hunger, already picturing the Kryptonian knelt and pleading as the venom did its work. At the last second, David stepped between them, palm raised, manipulating gravity to snatch Clark out of the stinger's path. Back off, Clark, he barked. He rocketed up, violet light burning in his eyes. Lightning skated across his skin as he began to destabilize local gravity, the moon's pull around them starting to riot. Everyone's bodies suddenly felt heavier, as though a mountain sat on their backs. If you're so loyal to Brainiac, fine, David said in a low voice. But I don't think you belong on his cleanup crew. He fired a concentrated spear of lightning. It smashed into the open air and detonated, a thunderous boom that erased anything it touched. The raw force of it was unlike the David they'd seen earlier, brutal, divine. Flower of Paradise, who had been backing away after seeing what David could do, blinked in surprise. He didn't even use his full power against Lobo? She gasped. Ryan lashed her sword and batted aside a mountain-sized boulder. The lightning spear would have hit. The boulder vaporized in the burst of energy. They'd been briefed that David's strength varied from the usual reports. They had assumed the gap could be bridged with coordinated attacks and a few injuries, but now doubt crept in. David hurled lightning like a god dispensing punishment, forcing constant evasions. "Give me one chance and I'll make him kneel," Parallax hissed. She slithered forward, every tentacle coiled for attack. Her venom could wipe out entire planets. She was confident. The usually detached Ryan growled and joined the assault with Flower of Paradise. Any one of the four could reportedly hold Lobo at bay. Together, they expected to overwhelm David. But David neither showed strain nor flinched. His blows landed like continents. Ryan raised her greatsword to block a fist and was blasted backwards, the surge of force nearly shattering the hand that gripped her blade. Flower of Paradise, launching an energy barrage from the air, was grabbed by David in mid-flight. With a cruel squeeze, he snapped her arm like a twig. "You were the weakest of them," David said coldly as he tightened his grip. "And you dare get this close." Raven and the others watched, hoping the venom would save them. Parallax lunged forward, her stinger spraying thick black-green toxin. David's hand still held her tentacle, and the venom sprayed across his face. For a heartbeat, it seemed to hit him, and the corrosive stream gouged through lunar rock like acid. It would have reduced anything living to a blackened trail of death, and on the moon it carved a deep, smoking scar. Parallax smiled, sure she'd scored a lethal blow. David blinked and whispered a word, "Shazam." Divine lightning crashed down on him like a response. It followed the tentacle he held and wrapped around Parallax. The smell of charred flesh filled the air. Her tentacles sizzled and smoked. She took the worst of it and collapsed unconscious, her body twitching as the electricity burned her out. David stepped back, sliding the Shazam force out of himself as though he had borrowed it for a moment. He looked at Parallax and raised an eyebrow. The effect had surprised him. He hadn't expected to be able to take her down so swiftly. "Lower magical resistance than a Kryptonian?" he mused to himself, and then said aloud, "Parallax." Raven and Flower of Paradise launched themselves at him again, furious. Raven was the brute, skilled in defense. Flower of Paradise sprayed energy from range. Neither had any advantage against David's overwhelming force. The four traded blows that cracked the lunar crust and sent crater rims cascading into new chasms. Molten patches welled where lightning and cosmic force met the moon's surface. David discovered, to his relief, that only Parallax had aberrantly low magic resistance. The divine lightning did not have the same effect on the other two. It didn't matter. He still had the upper hand. "I'll hold him," Raven snarled as she was thrown back dozens of meters, eyes darting toward Clark as a bargaining chip. If they could threaten David with the Kryptonian, maybe they could turn the tide. Clark, weakened by the kryptonite radiation, was forced to retreat using his lantern ring. From a safe distance, he watched the fight, unable to intervene directly. David's attention snapped to Flower of Paradise as she tried to circle around him. He absorbed mass from the moon beneath his feet and expanded. Thanks to the Hyperion template grafted into him, the mass transference made him huge and godlike. Where the others were just over 2 meters, David ballooned to 7, 8 meters tall. A single swing felt like 1,000 mountains collapsing. Ryan raised her sword in both hands but was driven to one knee as the blow slammed into her. The dust blast cleared miles of surface. She tasted blood, shock, and terror in her eyes. They still hoped Clark's lantern energy might protect him, but there was little he could do from where he hovered. Flower of Paradise tried to slip past David. Clark strained as he reached with ring light to help, but David's reach snared her. A vacuum of crushing gravity poured from David's hand like a miniature black hole. Her speed dropped. She couldn't break free, and David closed his fingers. He crushed her utterly. The sound of bones snapping rang out as if from a hydraulic press. Blood sprayed from her mouth. In a lightning-bright flash, she went still. Ryan, watching a friend die, went mad with rage. She pushed back the mountain-sized fist hanging over her and unleashed everything she had. David showed no mercy. He rose, dove down, and pummeled Ryan into the soil. Punch after punch drove her into the lunar crust until she no longer moved. He walked over, looked at the blood on his hand, and for good measure took her life with a final bolt of divine lightning. Then he returned to Parallax and finished what he had started there. They were dead. 3 supremely engineered biological weapons, each stronger than a normal Kryptonian, each now just bodies in the dust. David felt the smallest twist of regret. They would have been a rich source of emotion, comparable to several Kryptonians' worth. But there was no point in keeping them alive, and he still had Lobo. He turned his gaze toward the last clash in the distance. Lobo and Dimax had finally finished their own brutal duel. Dimax, bloodied and punctured with many wounds, had been roared into fury, and then, in a moment of savage finality, Lobo had wrapped a chain around his neck and snapped it. Dimax's talons tore at Lobo's arm, but Lobo didn't care. He broke Dimax's neck like he was finishing something irritating. The body slumped. Finally done. I'm exhausted, Lobo huffed as he pushed the corpse off him and dragged himself upright. His clothes were tattered and flecked with blood. He looked like a savage who'd wrestled a beast in the jungle. He grinned cruelly, then looked over at David with a sheepish edge. Hey, can you delete those photos now? David crossed his arms and sneered. Lobo bristled. He'd planned to play along until David was tired and then take the lantern ring by force. That plan had collapsed. David had crushed 3 of them without even breaking a sweat. Lobo couldn't argue. He scowled, half annoyed and half impressed. Damn it, he muttered. Why's the purple glow kid so strong? When do I get my photos back? Even holding the photos in his hand, Lobo wasn't about to obey. But David's strength had been superior, and Lobo had planned to wait until David weakened, then strike to snatch the lantern ring. When the fight ended, though, David showed no signs of fatigue, perfectly composed, unreadable, and Lobo clicked his tongue in frustrated disgust. Finally done. Clark floated over, worry creasing his brow. The kryptonite had pinned him to the sidelines earlier. He'd only been able to watch. After notifying Earth about what had happened, David said he no longer needed help and prepared to return home, ignoring Lobo's attempts to force him to destroy the photos. Before leaving, David intended to take the 4 bodies and Brainiac's ship. Those bodies could still be useful, biological specimens for research, he said. From Brainiac's ship, he might also salvage technology. Even if the salvage wasn't priceless, he didn't want the government, or anyone else, to reap the benefits of a battle he'd fought. Lobo stared when Clark lifted the skull-shaped ship David had claimed. Brainiac's vessel, menacing and unmistakable, was the kind of thing the universe talked about. Brainiac, more infamous than Lobo himself, was a madman obsessed with perfect evolution. You and Brainiac have beef? Did he put out the bounty? At least you're not completely dense, David replied. Legend says he obsesses over evolution. He destroys every world he visits, keeping only one city for study. Lobo's cigar went out as a dark thought crossed his face. Study? Brainiac's bounty, insisting the 2 be taken alive, was research. Another step toward whatever warped idea of perfection he pursued. Lobo's own existence as the last Zarnian made him a prize any lunatic scientist would want. He glanced at the monsters that had been lurking nearby and snarled, "Nobody screws with Grandpa Lobo and gets away with it." He summoned his space bike with a whistle, flipped onto it, and tore off into the cosmos with a half-hearted threat. Purple Green Lantern, if you leak Grandpa Lobo's photos, I'll never let you live it down. David smiled faintly. Brainiac would have enough to worry about for a while. Let him learn what it's like to be annoyed by an unkillable cockroach. Kara had been upset earlier and hadn't gone to League headquarters with David and Clark. She'd seen Lobo erupt across the city on TV, fighting Clark and David, and at first had been terrified for them. Later, when she saw David almost crush Lobo, she relaxed. Jonathan and Martha were still a little anxious, but not as panicked as before. Although Lobo had caused trouble, it was nothing like the destruction from the ancient demon they'd faced earlier. The greatest damage this time had come when Overman leveled a block of buildings to stop a powerful enemy. Necessary, everyone agreed, once they knew why. David's previous gift of a huge sum of money to the city had been partially used. The city government hadn't dared embezzle funds under watchful eyes. The compensation to those affected by the disaster had been generous. Some even received more than they'd lost. Later, from the second floor of the warehouse at dusk, Clark scrolled through online comments about the incident. Some people are even asking why you didn't destroy Lobo's apartment while you were at it, he said. David had tracked the flow of that enormous wealth. The money's been going to where it was supposed to, he said. Clark continued. The fortunate thing is that our response was quick. There were almost no casualties. His face grew serious. Didn't anyone pay attention to what Lobo said? David looked surprised. Given the public's tendency to overreact, he'd expected more fuss, especially when Lobo explicitly targeted the two of them. At first, some blamed us for attracting danger, David said. But I told Cyborg, and Cyborg, speaking for the League, explained Brainiac was behind it. Those voices quieted. Clark considered that. We made an enemy out of him by stopping Brainiac from destroying Earth, he said. David said nothing. Let people believe whatever made things easier. The more worrying matter was kryptonite. Clark, thinking aloud and tugged by real anxiety, asked quietly, Is kryptonite an unavoidable weakness? David thought for a moment. Clark had known kryptonite's origin since Jor-El had told him. It was a piece of his home, and he'd named it for it. Powerful enemies kept coming, and a fatal vulnerability was a constant risk. You can't always be at my side, Clark said, and this time his younger brother's worry cut through David. Earth and family needed him. He feared not being strong enough, and the kryptonite made that fear worse. You can overcome it, David said. Clark froze. He'd vented in desperation. He hadn't expected an answer. David explained, Spend a long time bathing in the sun. Kryptonite was a weakness to Kryptonians, but not necessarily permanent. In some versions of the universe, supermen increased their resistance by years of solar exposure. Some even spent millennia absorbing solar energy and emerged godlike. Clark winced. How long? David gave the blunt answer. You can try going into the sun. Feeling Earth's sunlight and being immersed in solar energy inside the sun are not the same. Clark's eyes lit. Can I actually do that? You can stop immediately if anything goes wrong, David said. He warned there were risks. In some universes, a Superman absorbed too much solar energy too quickly. The cells overloaded and collapsed. Don't stay in the sun too long at first. Have Jor-El monitor you regularly. Clark nodded eagerly, grateful for the plan. Okay, I'll remember. Oh, and in a few days, new members are joining the League. Be there, David added. Clark smiled. My memory isn't that bad. The meeting had been interrupted by Lobo, but after the incident, they discussed recruits and agreed to bring in the 3 remaining provisional members, Firestorm, Element Woman, and Hawkgirl. Brainiac's attack reminded them the League needed more muscle. David had no objection. Hawkgirl, it turned out, was an agent from Thanagar. Thanagar's wealth included nth metal, legendary for its properties. Pure nth metal strengthened the user, reduced energy damage, nullified magic, allowed flight, and even conferred a form of immortality or resurrection. David was intrigued. Its magic-nullifying qualities could even bother sorcerers like Dr. Fate. Hawkgirl herself was a capable fighter. If she'd come to Earth, she'd done so with motives more complex than simple treachery. She's not bad. She's a famous superhero, maybe deceived by Thanagar's rulers into infiltrating Earth. David glanced at a panel. Template fusion, 47%. The Lobo attack had stirred the public and pushed his fusion progress forward. The coming days would likely be a period of rapid growth. A few days later, the day the new members were set to arrive, Barry Allen tore down a remote country road, nervous and eager. He wanted to make a good impression. Today, he would play the veteran, guide the recruits through League headquarters. Despite less than half a year with the League, his speed powers ranked among the top. It was time his voice sounded senior, not timid. He felt like a kid on his first day of high school. A strange blue light caught him mid-run, a powerful glow pouring from the window of an abandoned house in a field of knee-high weeds. Barry slammed on the brakes and crept closer. Through the glass, 2 figures bent over a strange, 2-meter-tall cylindrical machine that hummed and bathed the room in that eerie light. Joy lit their faces when it began to work. Father, we succeeded. With this, our people can overthrow him, the daughter cried. The man's expression fell. It's not that simple. They weren't human. Green hair, slightly pointed ears, sunken cheeks, pronounced brow ridges, subtly alien. They looked exhausted, as if hunted for a long time. The daughter's head snapped toward the window when she saw Barry, fear flaring. Her hand trembled toward her temple. She was about to launch a psychic attack. "Father, someone's outside. Despero sent hunters." The man grabbed her hand. "Wait, Solana, he's a human. I can read his thoughts." Barry stepped inside in a blur. "Are you in trouble? Maybe I can help." The girl froze, uncertain. The man, prematurely aged and weary, introduced himself. "My name is Jason. We're not from your planet. We're from Kalanor. A tyrant named Despero took over. He enslaved us." As Jason spoke, Barry felt the sincerity in him. Jason had been a scientist on Kalanor. He'd been working on an energy interference device, something that could, to a degree, disable energy-based weapons. If perfected, Despero's army would be crippled. "Once it's finished, our people could resist," Jason said, placing a hand on the humming cylinder. His hope was tempered by despair. "Despero is too powerful. He conquered Kalanor alone. Without energy weapons or a proper army, our people have little chance." "Maybe friends can help," Jason added, more to himself than to Barry. Barry thought of Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps, keepers of order across space. "Green Lanterns?" Jason shook his head. "Despero is our species. It isn't an alien invasion. That's not their jurisdiction, and they might still be unable to stop him." Barry's heart skipped. If even the Green Lantern Corps couldn't or wouldn't intervene, Despero had to be terrifying. Barry thought of Overman, if anyone could defeat such a being, and of Superman. He hesitated. Would Overman intervene in a foreign civil war? Jason's face reflected the bleak truth. Despero was likely only starting. If he takes Kalanor, he'll move on. Other planets will be next. Maybe then the Green Lanterns will act. Barry inhaled. "Maybe we can ask Superman." Above Earth, however, something else arrived unnoticed. A majestic, dark red cosmic battleship slipped into orbit, silent and foreboding. "That's strange. Why isn't Flash here yet?" The Justice League Hall was impressive. Tall pillars holding up the roof, immaculate floors polished to a shine, an atmosphere of solemn purpose. It was the day to welcome new members. Aquaman stood by the entrance, frowning. Everyone else had arrived. Why would the Flash, usually the fastest among them, be late today? Maybe something delayed him, he guessed. Firestorm scratched at his flaming hair and offered an explanation. "Don't worry about him for now." Batman leaned in and said something quietly to the others, then stepped forward to address the three waiting recruits. "On behalf of the League, we welcome you." Clark and Diana smiled and extended warm hands. Firestorm and Element Woman, shy but excited, shook them. "We didn't expect to actually join the League," one of them said. "We're still young, but we'll do our best." David stayed to the side, uninterested in ceremony. After the others shook hands with Batman and Superman, both new members hurried over to him. "I'm Ronnie, Overman. I've liked you for a long time." The younger of the Firestorm pair, Ronnie Raymond, grinned like a starstruck college kid. He wore a red and yellow battlesuit with a nucleus symbol on his chest and talked a mile a minute. "What do you mean my behavior is embarrassing? This is the most powerful superhero on Earth. Nobody can see him up close and stay calm, okay?" He fumbled and then tried to laugh off his gushing, embarrassed. "Sorry, you might not be able to see him, but there's someone else in my head, Professor Stein. He's the other half of Firestorm." David smiled. He knew Firestorm was a fusion of Ronnie and Professor Martin Stein, joined by a nuclear accident and gifted with extraordinary transmutation powers. Ronnie controlled the body while Stein existed as a voice and presence in his mind, advising and guiding him. That must have been Stein speaking. A power like Firestorm's, the ability to rearrange matter at the atomic level, was an astonishing starting point. With practice, it could reach godlike heights. Ronnie's enthusiasm made him endearing despite the braggadocio. "You read my file?" he asked again, thrilled. "And me, it's my turn." The second recruit pushed forward shyly. "I'm Element Woman." She offered a hand that felt rougher than expected. Her appearance was startling. A white battlesuit, crystalline pink hair and eyes, a beautiful face, but below her neck her body was a patchwork of elements. One hand earth brown, the other raw gray rock. One leg normal human skin, the other wooden. "I had a chemical accident. I can turn into elements now. At first I couldn't control it. I only managed to make my head and one leg look normal." You'll get it with practice, David said kindly. Being able to shape yourself into earth, rock, water, fire, that's a tremendous gift. You'll find ways to control it. Hearing that the League treated her without awkward stares and that David, a man who had saved the world before, spoke gently brought a small, hopeful smile to her face. Hello, they call me Hawk Girl. The final recruit was calm and composed. She wore a golden hawk-winged helmet that revealed half her face and a shining nth metal mace in her hand, large hawk wings folded behind her. Firestorm and Element Woman didn't hide their faces. It was hard for them to. Hawk Girl had been accepted because Batman and Cyborg hadn't pried into every applicant's civilian life. She'd slipped in on her own merits. David reached out and tapped the mace with his finger. That's an impressive weapon. Hawk Girl's hand tightened on the handle. Thank you. She had been careful to present herself composedly. The man in front of her saw much more than he let on, and the compliment felt like an appraisal. He radiated power that made her almost nervous. Outside, in orbit above the planet, a tall red figure stood with his hands clasped behind him, gazing down at the blue world. His voice came cold and flat through the ship's comms. So Jason escaped here. Despero, a Kalanorian warlord and genetic mutant with a third eye and head fins, listened as his operators tracked a signal. Yes, Your Majesty. According to the signal, they escaped to this primitive world. Specific location, he ordered. The officers in red uniforms displayed the approximate coordinates. Despero closed his eyes and extended his psychic senses. From space, he could reach minds on the surface, and it took only a moment to find what he wanted. The Flash, Barry Allen, talking with the rebel father and daughter he had been hunting. He plucked secrets from the minds within range and learned the little he needed. The Flash had super speed. The rebel had allies who might help them. And the Justice League? Overman? Superman? Despero's mind swept nearby consciousnesses for information. The organization that sheltered the rebels, the Justice League, caught his interest. He smirked mentally. No one can help you, foolish rebel. Opening his eyes, he looked down at the planet with contempt. He had already conquered Kalanor and crushed its resistance. Now the rebellion had festered into something he could not tolerate. He wanted to expand. Let this world be the next under my rule. He pictured the scene he craved, Flash bringing the rebels back to the League for help, arriving full of hope, only to find his teammates slaughtered, their aid already beaten by Despero's hand. The despair of such a moment thrilled him. Born an outcast because of his appearance, he had learned to revel in making others submit. He would be worshipped as a god. We'll go to the Justice League headquarters first. That Flash seems to be bringing them there. Back at the hall, the mood among the heroes was light. Firestorm, still buzzing, explained his ability to Hal Jordan. I can change things into any substance I want. Hal's eyebrows shot up. Really? Like alchemy? Without exaggeration, Ronnie said. I can turn things into any material. Hal smirked. Looks like the League just gained another rich person. Batman was talking with Hawkgirl across the room, and Hal's barb was half teasing, half resentment at Batman's influence. What's the use of wealth against the big threats? He thought, but he enjoyed the jibe. Firestorm beamed at the idea of becoming wealthy, while Professor Stein's voice in Ronnie's head reminded him not to get carried away. You think Overman can do the same? Firestorm asked quietly, glancing at David, who sat on a distant sofa talking with Clark. Last time he produced that gold nugget that shocked the whole world. Who knows, Hal admitted. He's had a lot of abilities. Aquaman waved an arm. Forget the gold. Overman's already shown a terrifying set of powers, superhuman strength to wrestle the ocean, kinetic absorption, gravity manipulation, lightning generation, giant form. Who knows what he could manifest next? They didn't know the full extent, and some of the terms were misunderstood, but the point stood. David was powerful. Clark frowned and checked his phone. Something's wrong. I sent Flash a message, and he hasn't replied. Even with the police lab job, Barry always found time to answer messages. Either he missed it, or David trailed off, feeling the unease in the room. Conversation carried on, but suddenly a deep, alien voice cut through the hall. Justice League, recruiting new members? I find that unnecessary. Heavy military boots announced a tall, imposing figure who strode in flanked by red-uniformed alien guards. He stopped, crossed his arms, and surveyed the hall like a conqueror inspecting a subordinate court. After today, the Justice League will cease to exist. The room tensed. You monster, what did you say? Hal snapped forward, face reddening. Batman's eyes went cold. David rose with Clark and scanned the newcomer. Deep red skin, a third eye in the forehead, head fins, a familiar and dangerous profile. Despero had a presence that exuded dominance, and their gazes locked. Despero fixed his stare on David. He spoke with deliberate calm, as if announcing fate itself. I will bring you despair. I will end the Justice League, and as the sole deity, I will rule this planet. Hearing Despero declare his intention to destroy the Justice League, everyone in the hall fell grim. The creature before them, towering and muscular like a small mountain, radiated a malevolent aura that made the air itself feel thick. Beside him stood an elite guard squad, cold and efficient, their energy weapons gleaming. This was no ordinary invader. How did you find this place? Batman asked, treating him like a mortal enemy as he subtly reached for the bat shurikens at his waist. The League had dealt with countless villains, and none, aside from threats David had helped them stop, had ever discovered their headquarters. Even the newest recruits had only been told the location that morning. Had Cyborg leaked it when he sent the alert? The technology on display here suggested these attackers were far advanced. Not me. Not me either. Firestorm and Element Woman wagged their hands at Batman's suspicion. Hawkgirl frowned, gripping her mace. On her first day in the League, she felt unfairly suspected. Your weak minds are open books to me. I can read your thoughts at will. Before me, you have no secrets. Despero's voice was a grinding insult. David frowned, surprised. Then Despero's third eye scanned Clark and turned its attention to Batman. Just like the identity you desperately try to hide, an Earthling named Bruce Wayne. Batman's expression hardened beneath his cowl. A dangerous, cold glint appeared in his eyes. Bruce Wayne? The playboy billionaire from Gotham? Except for David and Clark, the others reacted with shock. Could the brooding, dark Batman, the man who rarely smiled, really be Gotham's frivolous billionaire? That's right, Despero continued. With the Batmobile, Batwing, and that Fenrir armor, who else in Gotham could afford such toys? Hal Jordan's eyelids twitched, and he immediately tightened his mental defenses. Such an obvious deduction, yet I didn't see it. Overman Superman, did you already know? Cyborg asked, watching closely. Damn it, Hal muttered, half joking, half peeved. I bet my underwear has been seen through 100 times. No. Clark had barely started to object when Batman, exposed and furious, struck. He launched a razor shuriken at Despero's face. Despero caught it casually, prepared to mock the slow attack. Then the shuriken erupted into thick, choking smoke, obscuring his vision. He coughed twice. Attack! Batman snarled and activated the wrist device, summoning the Fenrir armor remotely, an upgrade he'd added after his battle with the psionic pirate. Good opportunity. Taste my nuclear flames, Firestorm cried, unleashing columns of searing heat. Element Woman used the smoke to sweep low. Her leg transformed into a thorny vine and lashed out. Hal's lantern ring formed a green fist that whistled through the air. Cyborg's arm refitted into an ultrasonic cannon, and Arthur hurled his trident like a harpoon. They all struck at once. The smoke cleared under a blast of fire. Every attack hit, or appeared to, but Despero stood unbowed. Element Woman's vine felt like hitting two alloy pillars weighing 10,000 tons. It didn't move him. Green Lantern's fist fragmented like glass against iron. Cyborg's cannon and Firestorm's flames dissipated on his massive chest. Take it back, Despero said, catching Arthur's trident with a backhand and throwing it back faster than it had come. Arthur flinched, unable to dodge in time, but a silhouette materialized in front of him and caught the speeding trident by the tip. Be careful. David took the trident and slid it back to Arthur. Too weak. Is this the Justice League the locals believe can save them? Despero's face curled in mockery as if stung. Even Clark felt the chill. He knew he could not have casually blocked that much. Only David stood calmly. Despero, he said, more to himself than anyone else, one of the League's most dangerous foes. He knew what Despero was capable. He has strength rivaling Superman's and has beaten him before. His psychic power is at least as great as the Martian Manhunter's, perhaps greater. At one point, he forced Martian Manhunter to use a devastating one-time Martian technique, the Maya Wana, creating a believable illusory world in Despero's mind where the League had already been destroyed, and that saved us. Small pest, tricking the monarch of Kalanor. You proud? Despero sneered, then fixed his third eye on Batman. Like a hammer through the skull, a psychic shock slammed into Bruce. He cried out, blood trickled from his nose, he clutched his head, and collapsed. David's face darkened. He could catch a physical trident, but he couldn't block such a mind assault. Batman! Hal shouted, furious. He fired a missile. Despero plucked the missile's smoking tail, redirected it, and shot it skyward, shattering the League's dome. Dust and debris filled the hall. The guard squad leveled their laser weapons and fired. Beams pulverized marble where they struck. Hal and the others dodged. Clark flashed in front of the fallen Batman and used his body to shield him from the lasers. You want to conquer this planet? Clark growled. You're not fit for that. David hovered inches above the floor. His eyes spat blazing cosmic rays. The beams seared with scorching heat. Despero lifted his arms to block, but was driven back, his legs gouging furrows in the ground. The guard squad raised their weapons to relieve their sovereign, but Diana lashed out with the lasso of truth and knocked several of them into the hall's walls. They cracked, but the Kalanorians' constitutions exceeded Earthlings. They rose again, enraged. Combined attack, the guard squad intoned, linking their psyches and slamming a psychic assault at Diana. She staggered as if struck by a massive blow, but her mental defenses held. She had only one advantage over them. Even the elite Kalanorian guards couldn't down her quickly. Despero blurred out of the way of David's rays. Those white, forceful beams carved a deep gouge, turning soil into a molten river of lava that filled the hall with the smell of sulfur. Despite his size, Despero's speed was instantaneous. He leapt into the air and threw a punch so massive the air itself exploded. David met him mid-strike. Their fists collided, one huge, one smaller, and a shockwave detonated like a fuel air bomb. Walls shuddered. Everyone was slammed back. The guard squad at the entrance was hurled aside. Hal slid down a wall, groaning, feeling every bone ache. David was flung more than 10 meters before steadying, wrecked but standing. Despero smashed through the hall's main doors with such force, his momentum carried him through the front garden and toward the sea cliff. He plummeted over the edge. Everyone rushed outside. The hall was unsuitable for fighting an opponent like this. Despero rose from the surf, steadied himself on the cliff edge, glanced back at them with satisfaction, and touched a fist that still smarted from the impact. He could fly. You're stronger than I thought, Overman, he said before adding, it seems the fellow called the Flash was right. This team might make a challenge after all. Flash? Hal snarled, clutching his chest. He had feared Despero had captured Barry and tortured him for their location. Calm down, Clark said, solemn. This creature can shake David in a head-on clash. We must be careful. Despero paid them little heed. He turned to his guard and coldly judged them weak. Useless trash. A dozen guards who had just gotten to their feet crumpled. Mental energy had liquefied their minds. The sight horrified the League. They're your subordinates, you lunatic, Clark said, appalled. I don't need useless trash among my ranks, Despero replied without emotion. They saw your pathetic condition and spoiled my amusement. David laughed and then manipulated gravity. The seawater behind Despero rose like a colossal blue curtain, a wall connecting sea and sky. Tens of millions of tons of water crashed down, smashing the ancient sea cliff and roaring toward Despero. He punched through the tsunami and reappeared in the sky, nodding. Your physical strength exceeds my expectations, Overman, and you have other powers. I admit I underestimated you. Diana bristled. Since he'd arrived, Despero had only really looked at David as if no one else existed. Hawkgirl flapped to the attack first, charging like a warrior and swinging her mace at Despero's head. Diana leapt after and drove her godkiller sword down. Despero caught Hawkgirl's mace in one hand as if it were a toy. Hawkgirl strained hard and pushed with all her might but could not budge him. Despero's bulk hung in the air like a mountain. Let go, he said mildly, and like a child tossing a smaller creature aside, he flung Hawkgirl away and snatched her nth metal warhammer. He hurled it. The mace screamed through the air, breaking the sound barrier, and streaked toward Diana. She scrambled and raised her sword. Metal rang against metal as she was knocked off her feet. Professor, give me the strongest element you can think of, Firestorm called as he rose into the sky. With Professor Martenstein's guidance, he quickly transformed surrounding air into a high-density alloy cage around Despero. Element Woman drove herself upward on columns of earth, then compacted her body into the densest rock imaginable and struck like a meteor. Too weak, Despero said. He spread his arms and with a grinding sound bent the alloy cage apart. A single punch crushed Element Woman's incoming fist, shearing her arm away. She screamed and clutched the stump as she slammed to the ground. Diana lunged, catching her with the lasso. The League watched in horror. Element Woman's face was pale, but she peered up through the pain. I can absorb elements and restore my body, she said. I'm fine. Despero's attention shifted. He snapped his fingers and a psychic assault hit Firestorm. In agonized screams, a blazing split tore him into two forms, one a young man, the other a middle-aged professor. Both fell unconscious, brains ripped apart by the forced separation of their merged minds. Monster, Clark roared. Such a ruler is a disaster for any species. Since you came to Earth, don't even dream of leaving. Clark fired heat vision in a burst of anger. Despero sidestepped easily. Boring. You are all too weak. His words carried disdain. He unleashed his third eye. An invisible psychic shockwave struck Clark. Superman's eyes rolled back and he crumpled, falling from the sky. Superman! Green Lantern cried and quickly conjured a giant baseball mitt to catch him. Despero clapped, almost mockingly, and the League stood shaken. He had incapacitated Batman, split Firestorm apart, crushed Element Woman's arm, and felled Superman with a mental strike. His power left them reeling as he mocked them again, looking at David with a chilling smile. Chapter 184, 50% Fusion, New Ability. Despero hadn't brought many Kalanor soldiers with him. He had a quick temper and killed his escort for the slightest displeasure. He didn't need them anyway. He had conquered a planet on his own and trusted his own strength. Did you see that? Someone whispered. He knocked Superman out. It was true. Despero's power was terrifying. His third eye flashed and a mental shock felled Superman in midair. The mockery he had previously worn on his face vanished, replaced by a hard, cold dread. They had all been angry at his contempt, but now their fists clenched with fear. They pressed the unconscious and the injured behind them and turned to David with pleading looks. You should have stayed in Kalanor, someone said. You shouldn't have come to Earth. David checked Clark quickly. The mental blow had knocked him out but not damaged his brain. Satisfied, he let his brow smooth and stepped forward. The weather changed as if obeying him. Ink-black clouds thickened, wind rose between heaven and earth, and lightning began to fork through the air. This world is not for you to conquer, David said. Your arrogance will cost you everything. If Despero had stayed on Kalanor, David wouldn't have cared. But Despero had set his sights on Earth, intending to impose the Kalanor Empire here, to replace governments with soldiers and divine rule. That was intolerable. Lightning lanced down like a silver snake and struck Despero across the chest. The bolt could have vaporized steel, yet it only scorched him, wisps of smoke curling from his body. Your power exceeds my expectations, Despero said, voice cold. But I wonder if you are as strong where it counts. He closed his eyes and unleashed the weapon he trusted most, raw, constricting mental force. The third eye in his forehead flared and compressed a mental shock into a pointed strike aimed at David. The attack pounded at David's skull as though the bones were gone. David staggered, hand at his aching head. For a moment, he looked as if the blow had dazed him. A good attack, he said through gritted teeth. No one's ever made me feel pain with a mental assault. Purple light and lightning burst from David's eyes. He blasted Despero backward, cracked the earth with the force of his leap, and drove his fist at the invader. Let's see how many of my blows you can take. Despero's power lay in the mind. David had fists. Each had an advantage. Despero tried to invade and unmake David's perceptions, to twist the world into hallucination. But that kind of mental invasion takes time, more than a single innate shock. A hook punch the size of a meteor smashed into Despero's jaw, interrupting his intrusion and launching him skyward. Less talk, David said with a ghost of a smile. Concentrate. He followed Despero through the clouds and gathered 10,000 bolts of lightning into a ball of electric light. He smashed it into Despero's chest and sent him crashing down into the ocean. Without a full mental assault to rely upon, Despero was forced into a brawl, taking physical hits he hadn't felt in ages. He tried to split his attention, pounding David and probing his mind. But David's mental defenses were not like those of a native Kalanor, nor like Superman's, who could be crushed by a single blow. David's mind resisted, and then, slowly, strengthened. Despero couldn't do both tasks well. He had never felt threatened in this way, by physical blows that could cut through his focus, and by a will that did not crack. As they traded blows, Despero noticed with mounting alarm that his mental attacks were losing ground. Another mental ray struck, but David shook it off and surged forward. "Why is your mind getting stronger?" Despero snarled, bracing himself. David's reply was almost casual. "Because 2 days ago I didn't even know what mental power was. That's mostly true still, but I learned how to amplify it. I can use internal, cosmic energy." When his Hyperion template surpassed 50% fusion, David unlocked a new capability, one that Eternals had used for millennia. Hyperion's inheritance meant that he could absorb and store cosmic energy and then channel it to enhance various faculties, not just strength and resilience, but reactions, endurance, recovery, even the mind. It was a crude application, something Eternals spent centuries refining, but it was enough. David had, in the last moments of the fight, begun to mobilize that cosmic energy to bolster his mental defenses. A lightning-wreathed punch tore through Despero's guard, driving him backward. Seeing the look of recognition on Despero's face, David knew what his primary danger had been: the mental power. He focused his internal energy and tightened his mind like armor. Despero's eyes widened in disbelief. He tried to fight back. In a contest of brute force without the edge of mental warfare, he could not outmatch David. A blow sent him plunging into the sea like a meteor, creating a cratering column of water and a tsunami-like wall that radiated outward. Salty spray filled his nostrils, and Despero rose, soaked and furious, vengeance written on his features. "You won't be able to keep this up forever," Despero roared. "You won't live long enough to care," David shot back. He stepped onto the ocean as if it were solid ground, and the surrounding mass of seawater began to obey him. Droplets rose and hung like beads of mercury, waves compacted into a cloud of water that blotted the sky. David's body swelled as he absorbed the mass, growing huge. "You think you're the only one who can get bigger?" he taunted. Despero responded in kind. His body bulged like a waterlogged sponge, spikes and fins bristling, his maw splitting to reveal jagged teeth. The two colossi collided with seismic force. Despero was blasted away like a high-speed train struck by an even faster one. David's further strikes, lightning chains from his hands, followed, and Despero found that his own size changes didn't give him the same increase in power. Each punch sent him farther and farther back. Panic rose in Despero. He could feel the tide turning. Not just his mind, he thought. He can amplify his strength too. He's getting stronger. He had one desperate move left. "Take this, Overman. I'll make you a fool," he bellowed. Despero widened his third eye until the veins popped and unleashed a full-force mental shock. The invisible strike hammered David, and for a breath he staggered, the chill of it running through his bones. But it only made him wince. It didn't break him. David shook his head and surged forward again. That final full-powered mental attack had drained Despero. He watched, stupefied, as David closed the distance, fist meeting his face with the force of a collapsing world. Blood spurted from the corners of Despero's mouth, teeth loosened, and consciousness blurred. David's palm hooked around his collar like a vice. He whispered, "Shazam!" and a bolt of divine lightning, raw, godly, hammered Despero's body. Scorched flesh smoked and healed, and Despero was flung aside like a rag doll. David channeled the six gods' power to amplify himself, and the divine force left Despero exhausted and bleeding. Another punch, and Despero was rocketing toward the small island, impacting with such force that the ground split and a crater opened. Everyone watched, hearts in their mouths, as Despero lay in the pit at the bottom, broken, bleeding, bones snapped, but his wounds already knitting in a grotesque, stubborn way. David landed at the edge of the crater and hauled him up by the throat. "You have no more chances," he said quietly. "I will not die like this." Despero's eyes burned with a terrible, resentful intelligence. He glanced at the gathered heroes, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, and the others, and when he looked at them, he stretched his psychic will outward like a vulture's claw. Those watching felt their hair rise, a suffocating pressure crawling at the back of their necks. Invisible alarms screamed in their bodies. David could see it too. He didn't wait. 2 fingers, iron strong, plunged into the bulging third eye. Flesh and blood and a wet, choking sound told the rest. Despero screamed as if his head were ripped away. "My eye," he gasped. His voice dissolved into terror. David tossed the bloody eye aside and tightened his grip on Despero's skull. With a focused beam of energy laced with lightning, he incinerated what remained of the monster's visions. The rays seared through the 2 remaining eyes and into the brain. Despero's face contorted in pain. His eyes went hollow and black burn marks spidered from the sockets. The screams stopped. When David released him, the body slumped and slid back into the sand. The threat of death, of minds being torn apart and worlds being seized, died with him. Relief swept through the assembled heroes like a released breath. They were alive. The catastrophe was over. A flash of speed and light crossed the sea, and a figure appeared at the entrance of the hall. Flash, followed by a man and a little girl. "Who broke the door?" Flash called, rubbing the back of his head. "Why is everyone outside?" They turned and their faces went pale. The sight of the tall, dark red corpse at the bottom of the crater stopped Jason and his daughter cold. Both stammered and their eyes widened. That's... Jason breathed. "That's Despero." Despero had hatched a cruel plan on a whim. Lure the Flash back to the Justice League's headquarters in terror, then show him that the League's greatest defenders had already been turned against him. In his fantasy, his powerful teammates would tremble under his control. Reality, however, had other plans. Despero had not anticipated one person, David, who vaporized the tyrant's brain with a single energy blast. Flash had brought Jason and his daughter to the League, hoping Superman and the others could deal with the monster threatening Kalanor. The pair, exhausted and desperate, were grateful for the help. But when they arrived at the island, something stopped them cold. There, in front of the headquarters, lay the dark red figure Jason would never forget, the brutal conqueror who had enslaved his people. Despero's body sprawled on the ground. His eyes were black, like empty holes, and all the ferocity and cruelty that had once made him a living nightmare were gone. "You killed him?" Serana whispered, hand pressed to her mouth, not daring to believe it. Flash stared at the corpse for a long moment. "Despero? From Kalanor?" No one could explain it. Jason still remembered how impossible Despero had seemed, a mind power stronger than 10,000 Kalanorians, a body that nothing short of mountain-level lasers could scratch. Yet Hal Jordan stepped forward and said simply, almost everything was taken care of by one person. The others parted to reveal that person, David. Element Woman's face still trembled with residual fear and gratitude. She would never forget how a single punch from Despero had shattered her defenses. If not for David, things might have turned out far worse. "If it weren't for Overman, Firestorm and I might not be standing here now," she said. Jason and Serana stared at David in disbelief. A man from a technologically backward planet, this one, had become the kind of power that could fell Despero. Hawkgirl, who had fought against the tyrant and recognized the scale of his power, looked at David with conflicted thoughts. If someone like him protected a world, did Thanagar really need to conquer it? David glanced down at the slowly regenerating tissue in Despero's skull and then at the 2 visitors. "Are you Kalanorians?" he asked. Panic clenched at Jason's heart. He remembered the original sequence of events. It had been his fleeing and his daughter's presence that drew Despero to Earth. Flash had dutifully brought them to the League, only to find the heroes controlled and the headquarters ruined, unless Despero's own pride had given them a way out. Now, seeing Despero dead here, Jason feared they had caused the disaster. "No, certainly not," he stammered. The terror in David's calm voice made both of them hurry to explain. "We were trying to escape to Earth so I could finish some research and we could get a moment to breathe. We never meant for Despero to chase us this far." "Research?" David raised an eyebrow. Jason swallowed and forced the rest out. "We have developed an energy interference technology. If we caused any trouble by bringing Despero here, I'm willing to offer it as an apology." David listened, then nodded once. He had initially suspected Jason's experiments might have lured Despero to Earth, but the invention, impressive though it was compared to Earth tech, wasn't that kind of threat. More likely, Despero's own caprice, his need to hunt rebels on a whim, had brought him here, and then he had met his end at a hand far stronger than anyone expected. And now, David said, it doesn't matter anymore. He swept his hand through the air, creating a gravitational channel between Earth and the sun. Despero's corpse lifted, accelerated, and streaked into the sky. Atmosphere lit it in flame. In seconds, it was thrown inward toward the sun and consumed until nothing remained. Whatever regenerative trick Despero had used was over. This time, the sun ensured extinction. Relief rippled through the League. The crisis had been a close thing. Despero's mind had nearly overwhelmed them all. Ronnie Raymond and Professor Martin Stein, separated by Despero's attack, had experienced even stranger consequences. Stein had briefly rejoiced at regaining his own body, but instability quickly set in. Tests by Cyborg and Stein's own analysis showed that the nuclear reactor blast had altered them permanently. Neither could survive long apart. Driven by necessity and frustration, Stein had merged with Ronnie again. Firestorm was back. With Firestorm and Element Woman combining powers, the damaged entrance and dome of the hall were repaired quickly. Firestorm reshaped matter to reinforce the headquarters across the board. That should keep anyone else from coming through our front door uninvited, Firestorm said with a clap, as if dusting off his hands. With Overman here, we don't have to be afraid of anything, Element Woman added. Hal Jordan leaned against a wall, arms crossed, relief loosening his posture. Then I need to get his autograph, he joked. Firestorm's eyes lit up. I heard Overman hasn't signed anything for anyone yet. Me too, Element Woman chimed, and the two of them darted into the hall, racing over who would be first. Hal protested with mock offense. Does a Green Lantern's autograph mean nothing now? From somewhere in the shadows, a soft, familiar voice called a name. Kara Zor-El. Kara, who had been dozing, snapped awake, but she did not open her eyes to the attic that David and Clark had prepared. She was in a place that felt like flame everywhere, an endless sea of fire. Disoriented, she tried to take stock. She remembered sleeping in her cousin's adoptive parents' house. This was no dream. The voice she'd heard sounded remote, melancholy, as if coming from a lonely corner of the universe. You are not dreaming, it said. This is not Krypton's lava waterfall. Krypton has been destroyed. She spun. A pale figure stood nearby. His skin and armor looked like something forged from white dwarf matter. His eyes were a solid, glossy black without whites, and the lower half of his suit bore a familiar red and blue palette. The man's presence felt impossibly ancient and altered. Don't be afraid, Kara Zor-El, he said. I am Hell. I am also the last Kryptonian. Kara's hand went instinctively to the symbol on her chest. She went fully alert. Who are you? What have you done to me? I brought you to the surface of Earth's sun, Hell replied, spreading his arms to indicate the blazing outline in the distance. For days I have wanted to speak with you without your cousin or that other Earthman in the way. Kara's anger flared. She drew on the sun's energy like lightning and struck. Her blow should have been devastating. Yellow sun power was everything Kryptonians had been given on Earth, but it barely fazed him. Her wrist dislocated on impact. The recoil sent her staggering backwards. Bone-cracking pain flared through her arm. Shock and humiliation followed. A mountain-shattering strike had left her injured, while the man in front of her hadn't moved an inch. Hell did not flinch. Calmly, he explained himself. Decades adrift in the cosmos had bathed him in the light of yellow and blue stars, quasars, white dwarfs, neutron stars, and supergiants. The journey had altered his body and granted him abilities typical Kryptonians did not possess, spatial teleportation and telepathy among them. Kara, already familiar with how different suns could affect Kryptonians, found some of it plausible. Still, her trust did not come easily. I mean you no harm, Hell said earnestly. He touched his chest as he spoke. My relationship with your family runs deep. I was a student of your Uncle Jor-El. Kara's eyes narrowed. The name meant something. Jor-El was the scientist who had tried to save Krypton. You're saying you trained with my Uncle Jor-El? Yes, he was like a true son to me once, Hell said. Before the explosion, he helped send me away, into a ship that preserved our culture and technology. That explanation unsettled Kara. She and Clark had both escaped Krypton in spacecraft. How could this stranger know those details? She thought of her family's strained relations. Zor-El and Jor-El hadn't been close, and felt only suspicion. Why should I trust you? I don't know you. Hel's voice softened. He wasn't forcing her, only following, gently keeping pace. I need your help, he said, and I want to help you. She tried to fly away, irritated by his presence, but he easily kept up. Help me with what? Return home, Hel said, not to some vague past. He spoke plainly. To Krypton, before the explosion. Kara laughed, sharp and incredulous. He must be mad. Are you serious? I can go back to the past and change the present, Hel said. He fixed her with a look that held an odd mixture of desperation and calm. But I cannot do it alone. I need you. The words hit her like a physical blow. Time travel. The possibility the sentence implied was monstrous and intoxicating at once. Kara swallowed, the world narrowing to that single, impossible promise. You mean time travel? She managed. You mean time travel? Kara's mouth fell open. For a moment, she let herself be swept up in the beautiful fantasy. Even on Krypton, with its peerless technology, time travel sounded like a fairy tale. Time is the most terrible force in the universe. It can turn oceans into dry chasms and stars into cold, shriveled black dwarfs. On Krypton, they used to say that to conquer time was to conquer everything, Hel replied. If time travel were possible, there would be nothing you couldn't do. Saving Krypton would be effortless. But how would you do it? Kara backed away as if from someone unpredictable. Hel watched the blue planet in the distance with a calm, almost clinical expression. You probably think I've gone mad during my long drift through the cosmos, that I've started fantasizing about stepping back through time to save Krypton. He smiled and turned to her. For the people on that world, isn't flying without aid also madness? And we Kryptonians can escape gravity just by sitting under a yellow sun, Kara snapped. Are you saying you're like an Earthling and a Kryptonian? Do you expect me to accept that with such narrow thinking? No, Hel said softly. Not that. But in a way, you can call me a super Kryptonian. He spread his hands. I can feel it. There's a thin membrane between me and time. I can see it. I just don't have enough energy to break through. The scenery shifted. Kara found herself looking down on a smoke-choked battlefield in the Middle East. Between ruined buildings, two groups hunched behind cover, trading gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit faces twisted with hatred. Bullets tore flesh. Blood sprayed. Bones snapped. A man in a mask lobbed a crude Molotov. Flames erupted, throwing men to the ground, screaming. Kill, he snarled, charging his team forward. Kara's face drained of color. She had been unconscious when she first touched the sun. Now she was fully present and horrified. Is this my world? My people? Hel's voice was without warmth. For these humans, survival brings out the worst. They resemble us, but chaos and savagery live beneath the surface. He changed the scene again, and a world of endless ice and wind surrounded them. Kara looked around, trying to get her bearings. Hel's appearance had changed too. Gone was the deathly pallor and dark eyes. He now wore noble Kryptonian garb, handsome features, and clear blue eyes, the steady intelligence of a scholar. It was the face he could have shown her at the start to win trust. Hel plucked a chunk from a distant iceberg, and his expression grew sorrowful as he looked at his former guise. His voice, once cold and distant, had softened. He gestured, and a strange memory slid into Kara's mind. She began to speak unfamiliar, complex syllables. What is this? She whispered. It's a language from one of the factions we saw on that battlefield, Hel explained. I helped you learn it, just in that brief instant. Kara realized with a chill the danger this man represented. It was not only his physical resilience, strong enough to shrug off her attacks and break her wrist, but his ability to reach into minds and alter memories. If he were truly malevolent, he wouldn't need to beg for trust. If there is even the smallest chance to save Krypton, to save your parents, would you stake everything to try, Kara Zor-El? She bristled, but answered without hesitation. Of course. Then there is more than a glimmer, Hel said. Kara Zor-El, will you help me go back and save Krypton? What can I do? Her voice softened. Since arriving on Earth, Kara had felt the warmth of her cousin's adoptive parents, a simple, kind couple who had made her nearly forget her grief. Alone, she still missed her birth family, but the thought of being able to do something, anything, to bring them back lit hope in her. "You must support me," Hel said. The wind cut around them. His eyes went lonelier, like a wolf who has howled at too many empty stars. "I've drifted through the universe so long that silence becomes madness. When there's only you among countless suns, you begin to need affirmation. I need someone to tell me I'm right, especially after I realized, here on this planet, that Jor-El's son might refuse to go back with me to change the past. I need someone to stand with me." "Cousin? Why wouldn't he want to save his father and family?" Kara asked. "He talks about Aunt Lara. He cares." Hel's face hardened. "I've watched him long, before you arrived. Kal-El is Kryptonian by body, but his spirit is that of an Earthling. You grew up on Krypton with memories of every tree and field, days and nights with your biological parents. He did not. His attachment to the people who raised him outweighs his bond to his true people." Kara wanted to argue, but a cold memory of Zod's attempt to rebuild Krypton and how Clark and others had stopped him kept the words back. Clark had never spent a moment with his own people. Hel's point, while harsh, had weight. Hel's expression relaxed into something like a smile. "It doesn't matter. Your support is enough. Now let's get the first thing we need for time travel." "What is it?" "Zod once brought a device to this planet when he tried to make it like Krypton, the world engine," Hel said. He looked toward a grouping of ships half buried in a snowfield. "It can transform a planet. At its heart is an energy crystal, an ocean of raw power. I need what's inside it." Back at the Fortress of Solitude, David had just handed Jor-El an energy interference technology he'd obtained from Kalinor and his daughter. Jor-El examined it as a hologram. "Brainiac's technological approach is powerful," Jor-El mused. "He built things we didn't prioritize." David nodded. The tech Brainiac used against cyborg Superman could, if weaponized, manufacture a mechanical army. The device that shrank city lights could be turned into a weapon. "The interference device based on this technology is effective, but it can't tell friend from foe and lacks precision," Jor-El concluded. "That's fine," David said. He wanted Jor-El to improve it, to have defenses in case Brainiac ever returned. He paused, then glanced out of the research bay. Kara and a shadow coalesced outside. In the frozen silence of the North Pole, metal creaked as an invisible force reached into the Kryptonian mothership and tore the world engine free. Hel hovered in the snow-choked sky. With another telekinetic tug, he plucked a blue crystal from the device's core. It spun with inner light like a nebula. Excitement brightened Hel's face. "The crystal is mine. The first step toward going back is complete." "Who are you?" David's voice was cold as the wind as he appeared above the breach. Hel and Kara turned. David stood there, shirtless where steel and frost could freeze flesh, and yet unscathed, his strength obvious in the way he tore the world engine from its housing as if opening a box. Hel spread his arms and smiled with arrogant ease. His eyes locked with David's, and there was no pretense of regard, just the disdain of different species meeting. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Hel." David narrowed his eyes. The name stirred recognition and a rising unease. Hel, pale, scarred, dark pupils, fit the file in David's memory. Hel, a guard robot launched from the ship, and Jor-El's projection flickered to life with alarm. You're alive?" Hel sneered. "What is that?" He waved a hand and sent a telekinetic blast that hurled the guard robot into a snowy crater, shredding its circuits. Jor-El's hologram jittered. A bundle of data masquerading as a man. Converting humans to electronic life is a false comfort, a thing forbidden on Krypton. Kara started. "Uncle Jor-El, he is not your mentor. He's simulation," Hel spat. His feigned surprise and joy are revolting. Hel's hand closed around the robot at a distance, intending to crush it. Before he could, a brilliant energy beam struck his chest and flung him back. David's eyes held a faint purple glow, coiled power ready to ignite. The sense of being watched before, David knew now who it had been. David's mind ran over the old files. Hel was a student and colleague of Jor-El, launched from Krypton before Kal-El. The launch was a failure. Hel drifted through space for years. Exposure to radiation from numerous celestial bodies and passing through the heart of a violent quasar had granted him abilities far beyond a normal Kryptonian's. David's suspicion hardened into clarity. Hel had come with a plan, Find Kryptonian energy crystals. Build a device to absorb vast amounts of energy and drain the sun, obtaining the colossal power needed to break the membrane of time and go back to save Krypton and his mentor. The world engine that had been taken from Zod lay in ruins. David and Hel collided the moment they met. From the ruined control deck, Jor-El watched and sent a message immediately to Clark, who was thousands of miles away. Father's student? Stealing an energy crystal? Above Metropolis, Clark had just finished stopping a jewelry store robbery when his Green Lantern ring flashed on. The alert pulled a surprised look across his face. Under the cheers of the crowd below, he cut through the sky, breaking the sound barrier again and again as he hurtled toward the North Pole. I've been watching my mentor's son, Hel, to see if he can actually save Krypton, he thought. Hel had just been struck by a bolt of cosmic energy and thrown some distance. He recovered without obvious injury, lips set in a hard line. He had the air of someone betrayed. He's forgotten who he is, he said, voice low. Drowning in your false, bloodless affection, basking in the worship of Earthlings, betraying Krypton. A cluster of Kryptonian energy crystals floated up from his palm like a naturally grown bloom of light. False affection? No bloodline? David sneered. Beyond a physique that outmatched Kryptonians, Hel possessed teleportation, telepathy, telekinesis, abilities that made him dangerous. You must be very proud of your real parents. You're asking for death. The words hit Hel like a blow. He had been an orphan on Krypton. He'd never known his biological parents. Only Jor-El and Lara had shown him kindness. They were the only people he'd loved as a child. He hated that Kal-El could speak of family so casually. Kara stepped between Hel and David, putting herself between the tense figures. She turned pleadingly to David. We need that crystal to save Krypton. It's not important to you or Clark. Let us take it. This is Kryptonian property, Hel snapped. It's not theirs. Light flared in Hel's eyes like twin miniature suns. Kal-El was Jor-El's son, and the idea that he would throw away that blood tie for Earth, Hel considered it betrayal. You won't take it, he said. David's refusal was flat and cold. Kara watched him, puzzled. She'd only known him a few days, but he didn't care about the world engine the way the others did. He and Clark had even left it at the North Pole. David's reaction surprised her. Why? It's useless to me, David said, but I'd rather it be useless to him. Hel's crystal hovered above his head. David's eyes flashed purple and fired. Rays lanced toward the crystal, but struck an invisible barrier and rippled away. You think I'd be unprepared for a plan to restore Krypton? Hel asked. He'd erected a telekinetic shield around the crystal. Before I go back in time to save Krypton, I'll teach you a lesson. His body shimmered. He teleported behind Kara and then in front of David, raising a fist to strike. Earthling, he spat, you forget your place in the universe, treating Kryptonian property like your own. David barely moved. The gravitational field around him shifted abruptly, and a crushing force wrapped Hel as if a mountain had sunk around him. He tried to punch, and his arm seized. At that moment, a blue and red blur tore through the wind, snow and ice flying in its wake, and a fist like a cannon slammed into Hel's face, sending him flying. You are Hel? Clark hovered into view. He exchanged a look with David, then let his gaze harden on Hel. You're nothing like my father described. Honest, simple, reliable. Hel wiped at his mouth and sneered. Your father? A data cluster. You disgust me, Kal-El. You're unworthy of the House of El. If you weren't Jor-El's son, I would have killed you already, Clark said. Kara, let's go. Kara's voice trembled. Seeing Clark enraged made her panic. She could barely look at him. She knew that changing the past might mean Clark would never have been sent to Earth, never have had Jonathan and Martha, never lived as he did. She wanted to see her parents again, but she hadn't asked Clark if he wanted it, and guilt gnawed at her. I can leave as soon as I get the crystal, she said, but I won't take it like a thief. Hel sneered at her. He hadn't yet taught David a lesson, and Clark being here only sharpened that desire. Kara, hold the crystal. Protect it. It's Krypton's only hope. He handed the crystal to Kara and stared at David and Clark, mocking. Come at me together, Overman, Superman, Earth's great heroes. He lingered on the names with venom. Clark, already furious from being called unworthy, lunged as Kara retreated. Too slow, Hel said, and tilted his head. He dodged Clark's punch as if it were nothing, The mist sent a shockwave of air ripping hundreds of meters behind him. Clark's face registered disbelief. Up until the moment Clark's fist fell, Hell had stood still. As the punch came down, Hell simply tilted his head and slipped off the strike at a speed Clark had no time to see. Hell struck back. Clark generated a massive repulsive force, strong enough to move mountains, but Hell still found a path through and landed a brutal blow to Clark's abdomen. Clark crumpled. David lunged and caught him before he hit the ice. Clark spit blood, kneeling, shock written across his face. "I've never taken a hit like that," he gasped. "David, watch out. He's stronger than Zod." Hell had been Jor-El's student. If he was stronger than Zod, who was Hell now? David's face went hard. He patted Clark's shoulder to tell him to steady himself. Even a trained Superman could be helpless against someone as powerful as Hell. Clark was new to this. Yet David hadn't expected Hell to be so strong. Hell hovered, arms folded, arrogant and cold. "You're not L-blood. You aren't even Kryptonian. Killing you would be no burden. Say that when you can actually do it." David's body pulsed with a purple glow, humanoid, star-like. Then he flashed. He vanished from one spot and appeared at Hell's face before the latter could react. Hell lifted a hand to block and was shaken by the force of the blow. He had clearly underestimated David. His confident expression cracked. "You're not entitled to arrogance in front of me," David said and drove his other fist into Hell's face, sending him hurtling backward. Hell rebounded, telekinetic shields flaring, but David's attack punched through. Hell watched in shock as the iron fist in front of him grew rapidly. He threw up a barrier capable of withstanding a nuclear blast, and it shattered like glass. Hell had just enough time to catch and grip David's fist. "You've gotten stronger in the past few days," he said, eyes narrowing. "Do you think you know me?" David shrugged him off and chopped his other hand through the air toward Hell's neck. "It won't change the outcome." Hell teleported away at once and fired heat vision so intense it singed the sky. The sudden enormous heat began to melt the perpetually frozen North Pole. Ice and snow liquefied and then vaporized in an instant. David raised his arm to block. Burning pain lanced through him, and his strike carved deep grooves in the ice. A distant iceberg exploded and evaporated as the beam cut through it. David's expression didn't change. He swung again. Hell's heat vision and power were terrifying, cracking through several layers of David's defenses, his energy absorption and his physical shields alike. But David only ended up with deep burns across his forearms. Hell sneered at the sight. David's eye beams mimicked Kryptonian heat vision, and Achel dismissed them as inferior. Their fists met and clashed, airwaves exploding outward and sweeping hundreds of miles. Sonic booms split the polar sky. Animals fled the scene as if two titans fought for the world. David landed a punch that snapped Hell's head back. "Your strength keeps increasing." Hell rubbed his aching nose, anger and concentration mixing on his face. His speed had improved. The boy was no longer trivial. David's attacks came in blinding flashes, fists like lightning with the force to shatter planets. Hell had to match him blow for blow. He abandoned tricks like gravity and telekinesis and traded raw blows, each strike like a meteor. David had been born with vast cosmic energy inside him, and in the days since, he'd learned to consume it to enhance himself. Template fusion, 56%. A few more days passed, and Hyperion's template fusion crept upward. "It hasn't granted me new powers," David would think, "but I'm far more adept at converting cosmic energy into raw might." He'd learned, like he had against Despero, to channel that energy into his body, speed, strength, reflexes all swelling. It was like finding a key to turn what was latent into an immediate, usable force. On the ground, Superman and Kara watched the two titans tear through the polar sky. Each impact shredded atmosphere and carved ice. The spectacle was terrifying. Clark worried for David. Kara worried for both of them. She wanted nothing more than to go home and see her parents, but she didn't want anyone to hurt or die in the attempt. Both David and Hell had superb brains. They could learn and counter martial technique instantly. The fight had become a primitive, brutal exchange of power and will. "You're no match for me," Hell roared as a fist capable of leveling mountains arcs toward David. "You don't know what I endured. If you truly did, you wouldn't speak like that." David took the blow and countered with an elbow to Hell's head. They stopped hiding anything. The struggle resembled two meteors colliding again and again, accompanied by air blasts that cracked like thunder. Even before he'd learned to draw on Hyperion's template, David had had cosmic energy inside him. Now, channeling it directly into his body magnified everything. As he consumed more, the energy inside him flared like a supernova. His aura expanded and his power kept rising. Hell's eyes narrowed with growing alarm. David kept getting stronger, higher, faster, an ever-rising tide that threatened to drown him. Hell had fought, trained, and been brilliant, but he had little experience of prolonged, escalating life-or-death combat against someone who could keep climbing. Each wave of power made him more uneasy. No need. I don't have to waste any more time on him. David's power had been building steadily, each strike like a wall of breaking stone, a fizzing energy through half his body. Hell's eyes flickered. A blizzard blanketed the North Pole, ice fog refracting and choking the sunlight. In that weather, Hell couldn't draw much amplification from the yellow sun. The unpredictability of the fight made him pull back. He vanished and reappeared at Kara's side, instead of closing on David. "Do you remember someone just promised he wouldn't run away like a thief?" Hell said with a cocky smile. David's fist dropped. He'd already wasted too much time on things that didn't matter. A cold ruthlessness flashed in Hell's eyes. "Don't think I didn't notice you checking Kara's position more than once during the fight. If you didn't know I can teleport, you would have attacked her a long time ago." The energy crystal had been the key, but Hell's teleportation made no difference whether the crystal was on Kara or him. David never had the chance he needed. "Your energy isn't infinite," David said. "If we keep fighting you, you'll lose in the end." Like a victor, Hell snatched the crystal from Kara's hand. "I don't want to waste any more time. If my plan to save the Kryptonians fails, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Goodbye." Kara opened her mouth as if to speak, then fell silent. In an instant, she and Hell vanished into the freezing haze. "Where did they go?" Clark asked, searching with his supervision and trudging through the snow, clutching his stomach. He couldn't find their shadows. "They're not on Earth, but they haven't left the solar system." David looked up into space. "He won't get away." Clark asked the question that had been burning at the edge of everything. "What does he want with the sun?" David answered flatly. "He wants to drain the sun's energy to power time travel." Clark stared, stunned. The man who just knocked him down and bled him out, a madman whose goal was to kill the sun to change the past. Kara actually believed him? "She didn't know Hell planned to drain the sun," David said. He shook his head and headed toward the ship's hatch. Kara thought getting that crystal was enough. She saw an ocean of energy in it and wanted to save the Kryptonians, to see her parents again. She couldn't conceive how difficult time travel is. Hell's telepathy shielded her senses. When I asked her earlier why she wanted the crystal, she couldn't hear me. Clark frowned. Hell shielded her. David didn't argue. Hell's telepathy had enough reach and strength to distort Kara's memories and senses. David was going to ask Jor-El inside the ship whether the Kalanorians' energy interference technology could disrupt Hell's device when distant voices cut through the wind. Cyborg and Green Lantern descended amid ice shards and cracking icebergs. The Batwing landed nearby, and other members of the League climbed out of the plane. "Why are you here?" Clark said, coughing from the cold. Cyborg detected intense abnormal activity in the Arctic atmosphere and remembered you'd parked Zod's and Brainiac's ships here, Batman said. "We came to check." They all noticed the blood at Clark's mouth. When Clark told them a Kryptonian named Hell had fought David to a standstill and then teleported away with the crystal, faces hardened. "Is Hell really that powerful, stronger than Zod?" Batman asked. Even Overman couldn't handle him. Inside the ship, David explained. Batman set to work. "That energy interference technology is detailed," he said. "I can fabricate a countermeasure in minutes." Jor-El frowned as Batman examined parameters. "If the device HL activated operates at that level, we can only interfere enough to slow it, maybe delay it." "Even a single second helps," David said, eyes hard. 1 second could be all they needed. David stole a look at Clark and clenched his fist privately. If Hell succeeded, drained the sun, went back, and saved the Kryptonians, Clark would never come to Earth. David's own growth might be delayed, but Clark had parents, a family. Jonathan and Martha would be robbed of a son. The thought burned him. Clark repeated what David had said to the team. Faces changed. Arthur tightened his grip on his trident. I sympathize with what he's lost, but wiping out the sun to save his people isn't justified. Flash frowned. I'm going back to Gotham. If there's not enough time, we'll rendezvous in space, Batman said, already heading to his Batwing. Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, watched, puzzled. If the sun disappears, my people won't have long either. Diana's fingers tightened around the God-Killer's sword. Time travel? Is that even possible? Cyborg was blunt. The most likely outcome is another timeline. We'd lose this one's Superman if he succeeds. Everyone agreed. They could not gamble with billions of lives. David helped finish the counter-device Batman designed, lantern-shaped and humming with a faint blue light, then led the team into space. Most suited up in the remaining Kryptonian battle armor from the ship. Only Clark followed David without bulk armor. Cyborg and Hal piloted the small ships through the Arctic atmosphere and out into the solar void. Mercury, the closest planet to the sun. Hell is likely there. Let's check, David announced on the comms. Clark hesitated, glancing back toward Earth. Shouldn't we wait for Batman? He could be getting kryptonite solution. David's smile was almost amused. You figured it out? Clark blinked. You knew? Batman is meticulous. He always plans backups. He probably prepared something to counter Kryptonians. David's tone relaxed. And yes, he carries a bottle of kryptonite solution with him. Clark was surprised. Didn't know that. That bottle may not be just for you, David said, eyes hardening as they rocketed away from Earth. Hell's body is bathed in celestial light. Ordinary kryptonite won't have the same effect on him as it would on other Kryptonians, David continued. The two of them were closing the gap to Mercury. Clark's face grew grim. So kryptonite solution is useless? Clark asked. No, David said. He's highly resistant, but not immune. What's fatal is kryptonite radiation, not just the solution itself. And anything that emits that radiation can hurt him. David slowed the tone of his words, then glanced at Hal's ring. With a small shift in gravity, David manipulating the solar system's gravitational field using the ring as an anchor, they used a slingshot to leap toward Mercury. On Mercury's thin, battered surface, beside a ruined spacecraft, a huge crystal rod device stabbed into the sky like a spear. Hel and Kara stood beside it. This, Mercury, Kara said, taking in the desolate landscape. Her eyes flicked toward Earth, worry and hesitation writ small across her face. You'll leave Krypton's destruction behind. You'll return to our time, Hel said, his voice full of triumph. He floated the crystal into a receptacle at the center of the device. It slotted home, the machine humming as golden light spread along its form. Energy pulsed. At its tip, a focused beam vibrated with terrifying potential. Hel's face shone with ecstasy. Forget them, he told Kara. You don't need to worry about Earth anymore. Everything can change. They won't matter to us. He spoke like a man who had found his redemption. I've drifted through the universe, surviving by luck. I never imagined I'd get this chance. If my mentor could see me now, I will pull Krypton back from the brink. I'll be the greatest name in Kryptonian history. Kara watched him, disturbed. Is that why you brought me with you? Hel's grin faltered. Kara's voice was gentle, but there was suspicion. You don't look lonely anymore. I didn't help you get the crystal. If you go back and save the Kryptonians, you become a legend. Who will tell it? Will you tell your own story? Kara's thought sharpened. Time travel on Krypton had always been a fantasy, but if Hel returned to the past and saved the line, who would verify his story? If she testified, as a member of the House of El, one of Krypton's ancient noble houses, his deeds might carry more weight. With the influence of House of El, he could secure his place and keep the corrupt council from erasing his name. You're making me sad, Hel said, voice low. He tried to laugh it off, but his smile had gone cold. Kara's suspicion hardened into indignation. She couldn't see any other reason Hel had sought her out beyond the value of her name and heritage. The device thrummed. Shadows from its glow crept across Hel's face, making him look vast and darker than before. And this device, Kara muttered as she probed the tall apparatus with her X-ray vision. Inside it were too many components for merely storing and converting energy. Something about it felt wrong. My father, Zor-El, may not have been as brilliant as Uncle Jor-El, but he was a renowned Kryptonian scientist. Suspicion flared in her eyes. She didn't just doubt Hell's motives for seeking her out, she suspected he was hiding the true purpose of this device. "All right, I admit it," Hell said suddenly, smiling as he pressed his palm to the machine. "I wasn't truthful before," he continued. "The world engine's energy crystals alone won't sustain my time jump. I need to drain the sun itself to power the travel." "Drain the sun?" Kara's face turned white, and she stepped back. "Without the sun, how will every race in this solar system survive?" Hell shrugged, impatient. "What are you worried about? We travel to the past, we save Krypton. Then none of this ever happens." "Are you 100% sure about that?" Kara demanded. "If the time travel succeeds but the sun has been depleted, what then?" She had once supported Hell's plan to save Krypton, thinking failure might cost only them and a ruined energy crystal. Now he was willing to gamble billions of lives on a miracle. "You are Kryptonian, Kara Zor-El, not an Earthling. Need I remind you of that?" Rage flared in Hell's eyes. "No, we cannot risk an entire world." He lunged for the machine. Kara moved to strike it herself, but Hell intercepted her, slamming a hand out and sending her flying. His face was dark with fury. "What do you intend to do? Abandon the only chance to save Krypton for a bunch of inferior insects? First Kal-El, now you." Kara stared at him, stunned. This wasn't the man who'd first appeared, calm, measured. This was hysterical and brutal. I was deceived. This is the real you," she murmured. "Yes, I deceived you. So what?" Hell hovered in the air, fists clenched, shadowing Kara like a predator closing on prey. "I gave you a chance. Join me, save Krypton, become the savior of our people. Is this how you repay me? Choosing Earthlings over Kryptonians?" "You disappoint me," he snapped. A cold, overwhelming psychic force slammed into Kara. Her eyes went vacant. She rose like a puppet, repeating in a dull monotone, "Home, home." "That's all you need to remember," Hell said darkly. "I should have done this sooner. Stand there and obey. After we make the jump, I'll alter your memories." His telepathy wasn't strong enough to surgically rewrite Kara's past in an instant. Erasing deep memories and replacing them would take time. But he could impose simple commands, and language or surface-level changes wouldn't meet fierce subconscious resistance. "It deviates slightly from plan, but it will do," he told himself. He activated the device with telekinesis. A beam of light shot from its tip into space, arcing toward the fiercely burning sun. "If I drain this yellow sun," Hell said, "I'll have the power to break time and space." He didn't care about David Kent or Clark Kent trying to stop him. This was the planet closest to the sun in the system. Hell clenched his fist as the yellow sunlight cut through Mercury's thin atmosphere and bathed him, filling him with a surge of power that felt like it could rend continents. "Stop this, Hell," a voice called. Using a gravity slingshot, two figures arrived first, David and Clark, hovering in the sky. Clark glared. "How could my father raise a madman like you?" In space, the beam already reached the sun, forming a luminous bridge between Mercury and the star and beginning to siphon solar energy. Hell turned to them, amused. "You actually dared to come?" "Truly unafraid of death," David said flatly. Hell folded his hands behind his back, but his arrogance returned. "Only one of you will die today." "You're in the wrong place," David continued. "Here my strength is far greater than on Earth. My stamina is inexhaustible. How can you fight me?" Hell motioned at the distant sun with a sneer. "What did you do to Kara?" Clark immediately noticed Kara's blank, controlled state. "You even brought helpers?" High above, a Kryptonian ship, piloted by Cyborg, zoomed toward the scene. Everyone watching went still at the sight of the light bridge drawing energy from the sun. It was visible for vast distances. "He's drawing the sun's energy. How do we stop him? Rush in and cut the beam." Flash called, panicked. "No," Diana said. Even from far away, she could feel the terrifying force of the sun. Nothing in myth compared. "If we go in, we'll be vaporized by the solar discharge." Green Lantern's gaze locked on the device on Mercury. "We have to stop it at the source." As the Kryptonian ship approached, Hell reached for it with telekinesis, intending to crush it. Under his power, the craft groaned, metal deformed as if gripped by a giant hand. The hull creaked, and warning alarms screamed. 30% of armor lost. Panic rippled through the ship's crew. A purple energy ray sliced through the sky and struck Hell in the chest, blasting him away and severing his attack. A protective shield flared around the energy device just as he slammed into it. He bounced off with no effect. Clark's face creased. Do you think a machine capable of draining a sun would have no defenses? Hell, unhurt, mocked him as he floated free. He saw David and lifted a hand to strike with telekinesis. How odd. On Earth you hoarded your energy, never using internal attacks unnecessarily. Now, on a battlefield unfavorable to you, you squander it. It's not needed, David shot back. He burst free of Hell's grasp and launched himself like a cannon. They crashed together at blinding speed, flying apart. Hell steadied after a few meters. David skidded tens of meters away, knuckles numb. Hell was many times stronger here than he had been on Earth. Hell's scorn turned to contempt. Do you think you can beat me? The yellow sun amplifies Kryptonians. It's your inherent advantage. David's gaze sharpened. He raised his other hand, and the Green Lantern ring on his finger flared. But every bloodline has weaknesses as well as strengths. You can't have only the benefits and none of the costs. Hell had noticed the ring earlier, but had expected nothing from it. The Lantern Ring? The universe's most overrated weapon, he sneered. It's nothing to me. As David closed, the ring's light hit Hell, and he staggered, suddenly feeling ill as if struck by the memory of Krypton's death. He was flung away, spitting blood, stabilizing midair. That stone, the ones that drifted from Krypton. Hell remembered those green stones. Just being near them weakened him. David hadn't brought physical kryptonite. He had something else. What did you do? Don't underestimate this ring, David said coldly. Its power is subtle but fundamental. You can create matter, and that matter will possess properties, David said. Steel toughens, fire burns, and if you simulate kryptonite, it will radiate kryptonite. Hell's amplification cheat had been giving him enormous strength, but David's lantern could simulate kryptonite radiation, enough to blunt that cheat. That was why David had insisted on obtaining the ring. Kryptonians had enemies, and kryptonite couldn't be fabricated without understanding its composition. David had studied it, developed a kryptonite model, and taught the ring to simulate its radiation. Hell, there's still time to surrender before you cause more destruction, David urged. On the ground, Kara slumped uselessly. Clark's roar cut through the chaos. You're murdering billions of lives. Hell glanced at Clark, and his eyes narrowed as his pupils contracted. The woman he'd controlled, tasked to guard their only way home, had been subdued by Clark. After David transmitted the kryptonite radiation model to him, Clark had also been able to use his lantern power to simulate the radiation. Clark used that power to isolate the device's interference, flashed his ring, and pushed Kara back from the control console. The beam drawing solar energy faltered, its bridge shrinking as absorption rates dropped. Now, Clark shouted. Cyborg and the others landed and immediately attacked the shield around the machine. Hell barked, furious. You would destroy everything for these insects? For Earth? David intercepted him. Earth is a speck. Krypton once led the known universe. A single planet, mere billions of insects. What are they compared to our home? As long as I can save Krypton, I wouldn't hesitate to destroy hundreds of such worlds. Hell hissed. Their blows clashed in the thin mercury sky. The vacuum nearby couldn't contain the shockwaves. Ripples spread with each strike. Hell's words showed a twisted loyalty to Krypton. David's eyes had gone icy as he thought of his adoptive parents, who fell under the contempt Hell had shown. Insects? David spat. Too bad you're not as invincible as you think. His fist hit Hell like a crashing planet, deforming the super Kryptonian and sending him tumbling. On Earth, you retreated out of fear. You thought Mercury would guarantee your victory, but you lost your only chance. Hell reset his jaw, wiped blood from his mouth that the sun quickly healed, and charged again, snarling that any weakness David produced was temporary. His injuries and strength would recover under the yellow star. He tried to assert confidence as if shouting could convince himself. David answered with a lightning-fast barrage. Hell was rocked like a leaf in a storm. Between blows, David channeled the lantern's energy outward, forming a vast current that spanned miles and filled the area with the simulated kryptonite radiation. Clark hastily used his ring to shield Kara from the worst of it. David didn't want to kill her, only neutralize Hell. The dense green light washed over Hell. His face drained of color as the radiation took hold. David's voice, cold and steady, cut through the roar. Now, Do you still think you're invincible? No, no. Hell trembled, his body swaying in the air. The kryptonite solution had sapped him nearly dry. He couldn't teleport out, couldn't muster the abilities even ordinary Kryptonians possessed. He tried to struggle free, but was too weak. David watched, unimpressed. Your powers are failing, aren't they? Hell lunged like an animal driven to desperation, eyes bloodshot. David stepped aside with ease. Hell's speed now looked as feeble as an old man's. David caught him by the throat. Now do you still think we handed ourselves to you willingly? He held Hell up and looked toward Clark. Cal, Krypton is your home too. Think of your birth parents. Choked in David's iron grip, Hell looked at Clark as if pleading for an ally. You haven't even met your mother, Lara, have you? Don't you want to know her warmth? To hear her sing you lullabies? Hell's voice trembled with hope. He tried to sway Clark with the one thing that might break him, but Clark's face hardened. Mother. Clark's brow twitched. He had no memories of Lara. He had never heard her voice. Yet he had been raised by someone who had filled that role. No need, he said quietly. I've had a loving mother in my life, someone who gave me everything I needed, and what you want to do would kill her. His gaze sharpened, matching David's coldness. No, you traitor to Krypton. Hell's expression collapsed into panic. With a roar, he struggled, throwing a desperate punch. David's fist struck like a hydraulic press into Hell's stomach. He spat blood. Hatred and disbelief contorted his face. If it weren't for you, I could have saved Krypton. It's your fault. Your idea of saving is killing billions to create one alternate Krypton, David rasped, and then with a brutal twist he snapped Hell's neck. The body slumped, kicking up dust. Hell had indestructible physiology and potent telepathy. There was no easy prison for him. David's only choice was to end him. He unleashed a blast of cosmic heat so intense it vaporized the corpse. Because the kryptonite solution had weakened Hell, he couldn't be thrown into the sun as David sometimes did. Instead, he incinerated on the spot, dissolving into a molten pool. Clark watched, silent. He had never met this student of his father. Perhaps the life Hell had led among the stars had warped him. There was little to say. Overman. Superman. The Flash, panting at the energy shield, turned and shouted. He had lost count of the tens of thousands of punches he'd thrown at it. The rest of the league had hammered it relentlessly with no effect. With Hell dealt with, David shifted into a blur and moved like the Flash. A single heavy punch shattered the shield the others had been battering at for so long. Clark used his heat vision to destroy the device that fed the light bridge between Mercury and the sun. At last, the bridge was severed. It's finally over. Arthur and the others collapsed to the ground, exhausted. The sun, it's saved. Although we didn't do much, someone muttered. The Flash and Green Lantern exchanged a tired, relieved smile. At that moment, Batman arrived in his Fenrir armor, several canisters of glowing green kryptonite solution strapped in the cockpit. When did Batman start making an entrance like Gotham PD, always late? Hal Jordan teased from the ground. Batman took in the scene, then said after a moment, I flew here at full speed. I didn't expect it to be over so quickly. No one was surprised David had resolved the crisis. He had first crossed paths with Hell at the North Pole, then on barren Mercury. The beam linking Mercury to the sun had panicked nations across Earth until Cyborg, speaking for the League, broadcast the whole account online. People learned, in horror, that the sun had nearly been drained and that Earth had teetered on the brink. Overman and the Justice League had saved them again. Thank you, Overman. I woke up this morning and could still see the sun, the comments read. If the sun had been gone, others filled in the grim possibilities. Ice, earthquakes, volcanic mass death. The headlines praised Overman and the League, and online debates erupted. People were grateful, but angry too. Who had failed to notice the sun's danger? Calls for accountability to governments and the UN spread. Amid the outrage, the White House announced that next week they'd unveil an official U.S. government superhero team, registered, sanctioned, and, the statement claimed, more legitimate. More legitimate? Batman read the phrase again at League headquarters and frowned. He stared out over the sea, sensing a gathering tide. Morning in Metropolis, bright sunlight warmed the Kent home. David sat at the kitchen table, scrolling past the headlines without much interest. He noticed the empty chair opposite him. Where did Clark go so early? Jonathan Kent came down from the farm, rubbing his hands. He'd spent yesterday fixing the barn. He settled into his usual spot, bleary-eyed. Martha wore an apron and set a freshly baked raspberry pie on the table. She glanced toward the empty driveway, and worry creased her face, though she said nothing aloud. The family ate in a strained quiet. David knew what Martha feared. Clark spends too much time as Superman, he thought. He's risking his life every morning. He needs a normal life. At the Metropolis City Center Museum, a different morning unfolded. "Good morning, gentlemen." A crowd greeted as the red and blue figure arrived. Clark had detected a disturbance. A man in odd clothing had entered the museum clutching 3 broken rubies, muttering to himself. A nearby scuffle had erupted when he bumped someone. The result stunned onlookers. A 6-foot, 200-pound bouncer collapsed into a dried husk. "Is it magic?" an officer whispered. Clark moved in, serious. He'd planned to go home for breakfast after a small street case, but this had to be handled first. In the ancient Greek wing, the man Faust wore a blue jumpsuit, a theatrical hat, and an unsettling smile. He let one of the gem fragments lead him to a crude clay pot in the center exhibit. He muttered under his breath, cast a levitation charm, and the pot rose into his hands. Strange light danced along his palm. "Mr. Wizard," Clark said, landing with arms folded, "that pot isn't worth stealing. Put it back, surrender, and I can still be home in time for breakfast." Faust turned amused. He smashed the jar. Inside lay an ancient pestle-like stone component. He snatched it and, uneasy, looked around as if expecting trouble. "Sir, what are you looking at?" Clark asked, and then both men heard it, a creak from the central statue. An ancient warrior statue, dressed like a Roman sentinel, sword at his side, cracked and came to life. It rose 6-7 meters tall and fixed its stone gaze on them. Faust smiled wickedly. "Perfect. You came just in time, Superman. I've other matters. This is yours." He whispered a word and vanished in a swirl of smoke. Clark reached for him but found only empty air. A shadow passed over him as the statue loomed above. "I didn't take the item," Faust's voice called from nowhere, but the statue didn't look for words. It brought a huge stone sword down with brutal force. Clark was sent flying like a cannonball, through museum glass and dozens of meters into the street. Tourists and officers gaped. Clark staggered to his feet, brushed glass from his suit, and flew back inside. The statue was slow, heavy, and unthinking, but dangerous. The head came crashing off the building, rain of stone clattering and nearly striking a row of police cars. Clark explained what had happened to the dumbfounded officers, then took to the sky. "Unlucky day," he muttered. "Missed breakfast, and now some wizard tries to ransom the past." Meanwhile, Faust had retreated to his lair. He rubbed the stone component, traced a circle in the air, and a ring of fire opened like a throat into another realm. The sulphurous stench of brimstone and distant wails seeped through. "Master, I have found a fragment of the key," he reported to the voice that answered from beyond the flame. "Very good, Faust. Then what are you waiting for? Find the second piece." The voice echoed with the authority of a monarch who had spent long years imprisoned. "Master, those keys are guarded by powerful magic," Faust began, but a scorching burst of brimstone flared in his face, cutting him off. The voice cooled and sharpened. "With the magic you were born with, and the power I have given you, even Mount Olympus bows." The unseen speaker's tone was cold and commanding. "What more do you want?" Faust bowed his head, trembling as if before death. "I understand, Master. I will retrieve the other fragments and then free you beneath Paradise Island." "Hurry," the voice said, barely containing impatient anger. "I cannot wait to return and rule this world." "Yes, Master of the Underworld, Hades." Faust bowed lower, servile and terrified. 193, Pluto Unleashed, 4K. After a fruitless day of searching the city, Clark had no choice but to go home. "Clark, what's wrong with you?" Martha asked, reaching out to brush wood chips from his hair. He looked a little disheveled. "Nothing, Ma," Clark said. "I ran into a man dressed like a wizard this morning. He fought me with a moving stone statue." He sat down and tried to eat the rest of his breakfast, waiting on word from Batman. Before he left the museum, he'd sent a message back to League headquarters asking for help with the investigation. Batman. This morning, a man in wizard's robes robbed the Central Metropolis Museum. He seemed to be killing people with magic and took an item that was protected by enchantments. I think he's part of something bigger. Can you trace him? Identify him? Remembering the mention of magic and that David had somehow come into possession of what looked like a wizard's diary, Clark turned to him and repeated the morning's events. Do you know anything about the magic he used or the enchanted stone pillar? David, who had finished eating and was reading the newspaper at the far end of the table, looked up. The magic diary had mostly been his excuse for how he'd learned about LS Road Pond. He didn't know the first thing about magic. Magic? He said. The Rock of Eternity it has one of the largest collections of magical history in the world, David added vaguely. He wasn't interested in digging through dusty tomes for Clark's sake. If this wizard really intends to destroy Earth or rule it, he'll make his move when the time comes. David's bored expression aggravated Clark. Waiting for him to make his move might be too late, Clark said. We need to stop this before it starts. Well, good luck, David replied, going back to his paper. A moment later, Batman pinged the League's internal channel with a voice message. After receiving Superman's request, he and Cyborg had pulled the surveillance footage from the museum. Cyborg, being Cyborg, began scouring the web for any trace of the wizard. If he left any footprint online, he won't hide from me, he said. He swore revenge on those who mocked him. Over time, several people disappeared, and then he vanished from public view. Disappeared? Clark asked, eyebrow rising. Batman's voice came back over the communicator. He wasn't the kind of occult recluse who hides in caves. He stayed in the city. Batman's fingers brushed across a row of books on a shelf as Cyborg scanned the room. The house was stuffed with antiquities from the ancient world, Maya, Babylon, artifacts with a mystical thread running through them. Cyborg lifted a golden scepter ornamented with an ancient crystal above a fireplace and gave it a test lift to see if it was a weapon. The crystal flared with a bolt of lightning that nearly punched through the wall. Batman snapped his cape up, catching the flying, bullet-like shard of energized stone a few inches away from the mantel. Cyborg looked sheepish and put the scepter down. I didn't expect that, he admitted. Be careful. We're dealing with a wizard, Batman warned, and resumed the search. His finger paused on several relatively new tomes and at an open book on the desk. Found it. The pages were full of references to the Styx, the underworld, words that made Batman's expression tighten. Hades, god of death, he said into the communicator. Clark set down his empty plate, stunned. Was the wizard searching for something related to the underworld? There's dust on the desk. Faust hasn't been in this room long, Batman added, wiping a smear of dust with a fingertip. Most of these things are artifacts he collected from all over the world. Cyborg observed, cross-referencing images. What would make him leave and not come back? Before they could answer, the lantern ring on David's hand flashed wildly. He glanced at it, and the comlink lit with Diana's voice, urgent, strained. David, Paradise Island is under attack. Mother has sent a distress signal. Diana's voice crackled with the clanging of armor and the slide of shield and sword being readied. I'm heading to Paradise Island now to see what's happening. Paradise Island under siege? David set down the newspaper, surprised. Zeus had cast powerful wards to keep the island hidden. In recent centuries, those magics had faded, but it was still extraordinary for an attacker to locate the island, extraordinary enough that Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, would issue a distress call. Someone with extraordinary power has found Paradise Island, David said. He remembered what Clark had just relayed about Greek myth. You mentioned Hades, he asked. Is this connected? It is, Clark said, standing up. There's supposed to be a gate beneath Paradise Island that leads to the underworld. On Paradise Island itself, Amazon warriors poured down the palace steps in disciplined ranks. Kill them! Drive them out! Their commander cried. Arrows rained down, but the man at the center of the attack wore a protective field that made the arrows glance harmlessly off him. He formed a hand seal, and a bronze medallion hanging at his throat flared with a terrible light. The medallion bore the face of a woman, hair writhing like serpents. Amazons struck by the light froze, then turned to roaring stone statues before their fallen limbs could touch the ground. Felix Faust, smiling with triumph, stood among a corridor of stone warriors. He had walked across the island. Amazon after Amazon on his path had been turned to statue. The treasure his master had sent him to recover, combined with his own sorcery, had prevailed even against those the gods favored. "Queen," Faust said, voice oily, "it isn't too late to lay down your sword." Hippolyta strode from the palace, armor bright, bow in hand. "Hades and your news are tardy. I am no longer king," she scoffed. She loosed an arrow like a meteor. The shaft made ripples across Faust's barrier but did not break it. "Who rules now?" Faust asked, sneering. "Your daughter? The bloodline of Zeus?" Hippolyta's jaw hardened. "None of that matters. Whoever sits the throne will answer to the gods." Faust laughed softly. "When he returns to Paradise Island, he will answer to my master, Hades, king of the underworld." He activated the medallion again. The Amazons, including Hippolyta, failed to resist and became stone. Faust pressed deeper beneath the island. In a vast cold cavern, he found a massive stone door covered in dizzying runes, humming with a terrible power. He placed 3 components together, stones he'd found around the world and protected by wards, the last steps of a key. One was the head of a stone giant, one an abyssal serpent scale, and the third an environment that twisted mortal minds. With the power given him by Hades, he united the 3 pieces into a giant stone key and spoke a word to the other side of the door. "Master, I release you now." From the darkness beyond, a roar answered, "Hurry, I have counted too many of the years of my chains." The runes flared, then the door opened with a thunder like the earth breaking. Great tongues of hellfire licked out, turning stone into molten ruin. A tall man in tattered cloak and dented armor stepped through, eyes closed as if savoring the air. He threw back his head and laughed, a hollow, triumphant sound, while thousands of spectral corpses rose and roared behind him. "Mortals," he cried, "I, Hades, have returned." The divine presence was suffocating. Faust sank to his knees as the gods strode forth. Back at Faust's house, Batman and Cyborg were finishing their sweep when Cyborg's wrist projected a red warning image. He froze. "A global disaster is unfolding," he said. "I've got automated alerts. Something has triggered them all." Batman's expression went hard. In the North Sea, Northeast Atlantic, countless undead are pouring out of the water. Britain, Norway, Denmark are under assault. The offensive is spreading. Cyborg threw up satellite feeds, infinite ranks of desiccated corpses, hollows with red eyes, crawling out of the ocean and pressing toward shore. The sea itself looked gray with bodies. In London, people fled amid police gunfire. Bullets did nothing. The dead surged through modern streets like a nightmare tide. "Faust," Batman said, connecting the 2 pieces of evidence. "Hades, god of death. Alert the League. We're going to the epicenter. Whoever or whatever opened this gateway will be there. We stop this now before the dead overrun the world." On the way to Paradise Island, Clark listened to David explain. David's voice was taut. Long ago, the Greek gods fought the Titans. Hades betrayed Olympus, opening a path to the Titans. Zeus and the other gods fought them back and won, but Hades' treachery could not be ignored. In punishment, Zeus cast Hades down into the underworld and bound him there. The passage between realms was sealed, and the key was broken into 3 pieces. Those pieces were hidden across the world and entrusted, one of them, to Hippolyta for safekeeping. "The stone components Faust found, those were parts of the key," Clark said. "Part of it," David confirmed. He fell silent and stared out at the ocean. Far away in the direction of Paradise Island, an endless army of the dead was marching across the water, a weightless, hungry tide. The sight made the blood run cold. "What is it?" Clark asked, following his gaze. David's voice was low. "Hades has been freed. The passage is open." Above them, David's eyes were distant and hard as he watched the undead army advance, a storm of death sweeping toward the world. 194. You have an aura that I hate. 4K. When Diana returned to Paradise Island, she found it unrecognizable. The Amazons lay frozen as stone statues, the gate to the underworld gaped open, and endless ranks of the dead poured out. Spirits circled overhead with bone-chilling roars, filling the air with an eerie, oppressive dread. The once beautiful Isle of the Amazons had become like the underworld itself. She cut through the marching dead with a blade and shield, every stroke a promise to find the source of the corruption, to free her sisters from whatever enchantment had petrified them, and to find her mother, whose fate was unknown. In front of the underworld gate, Hades stood free and smiling. He had drawn his sword and summoned an infinite tide of the dead to begin the conquest of the mortal realm. Beside him, Faust bowed, and with a sweep of his hand, the stone image of Hippolyta floated in, deposited at Hades' feet. "The Queen of the Amazons, my brother's lover," Faust announced, face alight with triumph. Hades regarded the rigid statue with playful contempt. "The brave and noble queen, why are you so still?" He reached out and touched Hippolyta. The stone on her neck and above crumbled. She was freed from petrification from the neck up, and no further. Faust's breath hitched. A feverish hope lit his eyes. "As expected of Hades, king of the underworld," he whispered, "one of the strongest of Olympus, right alongside Zeus and Poseidon." Hippolyta, unable to move below her throat, turned a furious glare on Faust. "You set him free? You madman." Hades looked around at Paradise Island as if seeing it for the first time in a long time. He stroked his chin and chuckled, a cold hatred flickering across his features. "My brother built this paradise for his lovers and his daughter, while he cast me down, forced me to spend millennia in Tartarus under poison fire and the black currents of the Styx. That's exactly where you belong," Hippolyta spat. "Never forget what you did, what shameless things you did." Faust's grin wavered under Hippolyta's rebuke. He remembered the promise. "Master," he said eagerly, stepping forward, "remember what you promised me?" Hades patted his forehead. "Oh yes, I promised the one who freed me the ultimate magical truth." Faust's pulse raced. Gods were born of magic. To grasp the ultimate truth of magic itself would mean power beyond imagining. He leaned forward, drawn like a moth to a flame. Hippolyta's eyes were hard. "Do not delude yourself," she warned him. "He is treacherous by nature." Faust hesitated as Hades' gaze turned to him, an instant of doubt. Hades smiled slowly and extended a finger. A point of flickering, galaxy-deep light gathered at its tip. Faust swallowed and stepped closer, oblivious to the look in Hades' eyes, a look that was not indulgent but hungry. Hades' hand began to move to punish the presumptuous mortal when a desperate cry echoed from outside the cave. "Mother!" Diana cut a swath through the undead like a blade mowing grass, calling out as she forced her way toward the cave. She wore the lasso of truth at her hip and carried the godkiller sword. Her presence snagged Hades' attention. A faint light passed through his gaze and he paused. "You haven't brought me enough," Hades said coldly to Faust. Faust's excitement wavered. "Master, how could you grant me the truth?" "Not only Hippolyta deserves my notice," Hades replied, looking toward the sky. "You brought only her. Others have come. Heroes still walk the mortal world, reminders of my brother's demigod line. I wonder how they stack up against my brother's sons." From the sky, Clark hurtled down like a missile. He crashed into the dead ranks, sending bodies flying, heat vision carved through skeletal forms with clinical detachment. "David," he called between blows, "a powerful sorcerer broke into Paradise Island and is heading toward the central forbidden zone. Mother never let us enter. I don't know what's there, but it's not good." Diana's head snapped skyward. "Mother might be down there." David hovered above the island, taking in the scene. Hippolyta's stone body, Faust, and another tall figure in dark armor who radiated cold menace. Hades. The earth thundered. A volley of skeletal archers loosed a rain of arrows at David. They fell harmlessly away as he redirected the attack. Then gravity itself slammed down across Paradise Island. David felt the air compress. Tens of thousands of the dead were instantly obliterated into dust as if a mountain had crushed them. Clark and Diana were thrown back by the force. The tide of corpses ended where it had begun. David reached for the ground and tried to pry it open to free Hippolyta. He had once slain a god of war. He had grown far stronger since. Still, he did not underestimate Hades. Among the Olympians, outside of Zeus, this lord of the underworld is likely the most dangerous. Beneath the cave, Hades' power lashed out. He unhurriedly extended a finger, and an ominous gray-green energy sparked. Hippolyta slumped, rooted as if bound to every stone of the underworld. David strained and could not budge her. He frowned. Gravity alone was not explaining it. "Mortal, you carry a scent I detest," Hades intoned, his voice like stone grinding, echoing in David's ears. The Shazam power David bore, the six gods' power, was laced with the wisdom of Solomon and Atlas's, stamina, but also with inheritance from Zeus or his sons. Hades despised any hint of Zeus's authority. David answered without shouting, knowing Hades could hear. "You are arrogant, Hades." Infuriated, Hades shaped his divine power into a bident that hummed like a blade of annihilation. He hurled it through the cave roof toward David. The godling tilted his head, and the weapon embedded itself in a medium-sized island miles away. Vegetation withered, animals collapsed into shriveled corpses. A greenish ruin replaced a green island in a heartbeat. David watched, grim. Hades' power is dreadful. Faust had no time for subtlety. He floated out, loose magic exploding from his palms in a barrage to break through. He wanted Diana alive to curry favor. Hades wanted to toy with her. Hades ascended into the air, a dozen meters from where David hovered. "When I languished in hell, I took pleasure in burning fools to cinders," he said, and from his mouth a hellfire burst, black and red, a scorching column that smelled of torment and flame. Thunderclouds rolled back from its heat as it burned half the sky crimson. David caught a bolt of lightning and hurled it like a spear into Hades' maw, but the god's hellfire swallowed it. The pillar turned and swept, consuming clouds and pursuers alike. Hades laughed, his pupils narrowing to vertical emerald slits, uncanny and bestial. "My brother's power is pleasant on the tongue, but too weak now." Far out, Firestorm looked back and saw what Hades had done. An entire island turned to a mass grave, a landscape as absolute and terrible as a holy conflagration. Element Woman swallowed hard, feeling as if a gulf, an abyss, had opened there. "Good news," came a message. "Superman, Overman, and Wonder Woman have arrived over that other battlefield. We need to contain these corpses here and keep the mortal world safe." Green Lantern hovered, watching distant attacks. Hawkgirl swept her nth metal mace through ranks of the dead, cutting limbs and bones with a grim smile. The corpses were like mummies, rotted flesh and exposed gums, and their stench turned stomachs. Element Woman's fist turned into a stone hammer as she smashed a leaper aside and sent flames and element-driven attacks into the tidal wave of the dead. Firestorm grumbled as he attacked with nuclear flame. He and Professor Martin Stein, unwillingly fused, argued about who was who as they fought. They'd missed some past battles and had taken time off for recovery. Now they were glad to be here. Hawkgirl, resolute and fierce, kept the front line steady. Batman arrived with grim purpose, cutting through more of the dead and pulling Firestorm's attention away from his complaints. He looked toward Paradise Island with a hard expression. "Hades, king of the underworld," he said, remembering what Superman had warned. He glanced upward and inward at the thought. Overman, could he protect this world again? Could anyone stop the King of Death unleashed on the earth? The battlefield held its breath as gods and heroes faced an enemy who fed on the dead, while beneath them the Queen of the Amazons remained bound, only inches away, and yet so far. "You're the one who turned my people into stone statues, aren't you?" Diana hurtled through the air, eyes blazing, her god-killer sword raised. After dodging a flurry of dark magic, she drove the blade at Faust. He slipped out of the way midair, fingers brushing the ancient bronze medallion at his chest, its glow now faint, with a look like regret. "Yes, it was me," he admitted. "Too bad this treasure's power is limited. After petrifying so many Amazonians, it needs time to recharge. Otherwise, taking you would have been easy. I have my mother's silver bracelets. Your dark magic won't touch me." Diana looped her lasso of truth around a nearby tree and pulled it free like a pulled radish, then hurled the entire 15-meter trunk at him. It smashed into Faust's magical shield and splintered into jagged pieces. Diana surged between the fragments and cleaved the barrier with one brutal stroke. Faust scrambled back, narrowly avoiding a strike that might have cleaved him in two. "You can't be underestimated. You're truly the daughter of the king of the gods," he muttered, grim. Faust scattered several seeds into the wind. They sprouted into towering thorned vines that lashed out at Diana like enormous serpents, their barbs glinting with an otherworldly black sheen. She battered them aside with her sword, but Faust, steeped in sinister magic and bolstered by Hades, kept pace, trading blows she couldn't quite dominate. For a moment the fight leveled out. "Hey, monster! Over here!" Clark saw the tall figure suddenly appear, breathing hellfire as he chased David. Clark rocketed forward and struck Hades from behind, but Hades simply turned and, with a casual gesture, swatted Clark aside as if flicking a fly. Clark went flying, tore through treetops, smashed into a cliffside and skidded across crumbling rock. He tasted blood and his sight blurred. This was Hades' power, the king of the underworld, and Clark felt how small his own strength was in comparison. As Hades turned back, an iron fist swelled in the air before him. Boom! A shockwave flattened the island's trees like grass and sent Hades tumbling. He landed hard, face set in fury. A mortal had struck him. "Who do you think you are? Kneel before me, mortal," Hades bellowed, his voice shaking the sky. David crossed his arms against the divine pressure and was shoved back a few meters. Lightning crackled over his body, and he punched Hades without hesitation. "You hate the underworld so much you left it," he said, "so I'll grant you a nicer destination than the mortal world." Gods had a tendency to swell with pride after centuries of worship. Ares had been that way. Hades was no different. Splendid, arrogant, easily provoked. The nicer destination David named was Olympus. Hades, though Lord of the Dead, was still an Olympian. Slaying him would only send him back to Mount Olympus to be reborn. "You're even more arrogant than my brother's thickest-headed son, Hagrid," David added casually. Hades' eyes flared. He summoned tendrils of sickly green smoke, full of screaming, twisted faces, and the chill winds of the underworld whipped across the island. "I'll teach you reverence," he snarled. They clashed. Lightning met the malice-tinged divine power of death and scattered in flashes. Hades bristled when he realized the mortal before him was physically stronger than he expected. Blocking blows made his hands tingle with shock. He could not accept being outmatched. Casting off any pretense of humanity, he revealed his true form: wolf-like ears, a monstrous visage, bone-white horns, and 3 writhing, tongue-like appendages. "Hideous and otherworldly," he declared. "This is my true power. Taste the might of a god." Hades' punch hurled David dozens of meters. For a moment it seemed Hades had regained the upper hand. David steadied himself, drew on the cosmic energy within, a supernova of power, and surged back. Hades' divine death power dulled the Shazam Force's Zeus-born power, but David's body, fortified by cosmic energy, shrugged off much of the dread influence. The chill and moments of weakness were driven away by the burning star within him. As he increased his output, his blows started to overwhelm Hades. Each punch struck with the force to overturn rivers, pushing the god back. "Cerberus, my hound!" Hades howled. The sky bled red and an earthen roar answered from below. A vast dark red shadow erupted from the ground, dripping lava, the 3-headed hellhound of legend. Its head slobbered lava, spat the corrosive waters of the Styx, and vomited thick black venom. It lunged with 3 gaping maws. David ducked and evaded, and Clark leaped into the fray. The hellhound intended to tear him apart, but another blur intercepted it, seizing a neck and slamming the beast into a distant mountain. Such strength! Clark was pinned beneath the monster's bulk, its power nearly too much even for him. He heaved it, slammed it headfirst into the ground. The hellhound gave a bellow like a giant dog in agony. Clark vaulted on top, grabbed the fur at its throat, and swung to strike, but erupting lava forced him to pull back. He flicked the embers off him, and at lightning speed charged again. The beast and the man wrestled, trees snapping and dirt flying. Clark's muscles strained, and he gritted his teeth. The fight with the hellhound left him breathless, but he believed he could handle this monster, even if the king of the underworld himself was another matter. Hades' jaw tightened. With his hound occupied, he formed a wicked bident and drove it down toward David, channeling a tide of death energy. For a moment, sheer physical might clashed with the god's malign divine force, and the outcome was uncertain. Farther out at sea, the League fought their own war. Cyborg hovered, jets flaring, his ultrasonic cannon reducing undead soldiers on the water to husks and broken corpses. Hal Jordan's lantern ring shaped a floating base on the ocean, is even spinning a spectral Gatling gun that poured forth 1,000 slashes of green energy per second, shredding skeletal forms. But Arthur moved like a leviathan beneath the waves, his trident stirring titanic swells that capsized undead-laden boats and dragged scores of corpses to the seabed. "Let me do the big stuff," Firestorm grinned. He dropped low and touched the sea with both hands. In an instant, he transformed the surface water into napalm. The blue gave way to black, 10 miles of sea slicked and flushing with burning fuel. He mimed a handgun and fired a flame bullet. Towering infernos leapt to life, tongues of fire licking the sky. Cyborg and Hal backed off coughing. Batman, inside his mech, clenched his jaw and also withdrew. The acrid stench of napalm and burning flesh coiled through the air, choking the heroes. Ugh, I regret this, Firestorm coughed, covering his nose. Hal quickly formed a gas mask with his ring. I still have one good lung, he joked weakly. Cyborg summoned a steel faceplate. Element Woman waved a hand and released a puff of pink freshener that did little against the choking smoke. Hawkgirl beat her wings and climbed high to escape the stench, frowning at the reckless but effective display of power. The conflagration incinerated the undead on contact, but something worse was happening. The 10-mile napalm slick slowed the tide of the dead for only a heartbeat. From the far side of the sea, more undead poured in, an endless surge. They streamed into the burning waters, their bodies snuffing flame as if it were nothing, and kept coming like a tide of insects. The sight made even the bravest feel a weight in their chests. How many more are there? Hal asked, scanning the horizon. Our energy is finite, Cyborg said tersely. This horde looks endless. Batman cut in over the comms. Flash, how are you doing? On the city side, Flash panted between blows. He was clearing undead in the streets, but every effort cost stamina. Almost cleared the mummies at this port, Flash said, rubbing his wrists. He couldn't keep it up forever. Batman and the others leaving meant he might have to hold the line alone. Batman made the call. Hold as long as you can. We have to support Overman and Superman. Paradise Island is critical. He looked toward the island, where Hades and David were locked in godly combat. They had no more knowledge of true divine warfare than they'd had before the last demon incursion. That time, a single spell had stripped them of their powers. They'd been fortunate Batman and Hal had enough reserve to keep things from collapsing until reinforcements arrived. This time it was Hades, legendary and more dreadful than the last adversary. We move, Batman ordered. The team pivoted toward Paradise Island. Above the island, both Hades and David felt the drain. Neither had infinite energy. Hades had thrown everything into overwhelming attacks to break the mortal who dared defy him, but every spell ate at his reserves. Why are you still alive? He snarled. He drove a condensed lance of death energy toward David, an injection meant to turn whole seas into dead zones, and David batted it away as if it were dust. The death energy I put into you should have left this entire ocean a wasteland, Hades spat. Even my brother would not ignore such power. Without warning, David charged and drove Hades back hundreds of meters with a single, crushing blow. Hades staggered, blood at his mouth, and stared at David as if at an impossibility. He had assumed physical strength could be a neat weakness for mortals. He had not expected this. Gods ruled by divine might, and death's power was among the most terrifying. Yet the tide of the battle was shifting in ways he had never imagined. The next chain of events was about to outstrip even his worst expectations. During the battle, Hades' death divine power easily overwhelmed David's lightning. Wave after wave of malignant energy struck his body, drilling into his flesh like a swarm of maggots. At first, David showed no sign of distress, and Hades dismissed him. This mortal's body was even stronger than Hades' divine form. But as the fight dragged on, the death power accumulated in David to a terrifying degree. Still, he showed no pain. Hades could hardly believe it. You should have been mummified by my power long ago, Hades snarled. You should have begged me for release, trembling in ultimate fear and despair. Thrown through the air, Hades was forced back by David's relentless assaults. I did feel your power, David said coldly, his iron fists hitting like exploding meteorites. In the past, he had neutralized attacks by manipulating energy, but as his enemies grew stronger, casual blows outpaced the limits of his short-term absorption. Hades' divine power was far more malicious and corrosive than Ares's. Like the river Styx itself, it resisted conversion. Converting most energies is as easy as eating and drinking, David thought. Converting Hades' divine power is like gulping down a bottle of disinfectant. He pummeled Hades deep into the ground. Paradise Island shook and fissured from the impact. I don't know why, David said through clenched teeth, but when your divine power entered my body, it didn't tear me apart. It seemed strangely compatible. Compatible? Mortal? What are you talking about? Hades spat, rising from the grotto in shock and fury. That was his power, the god of the underworld's power, and it should not be at home in a mere human. Worse, under his strong will, the death power actually refused to attack the mortal on its own. That suggested the mortal might be more suited to command the underworld than Hades himself. Hades, who had long resented being his brother's appointed ruler of the dead, could not bear the humiliation of a human being more worthy of that role. Template fusion, 72%. Floating above the grotto with the sun behind him, David fixed Hades with scorching beams from his eyes. "Don't act like you're the center of everything," he said. He had gained Hyperion's signature atomic ray after his fusion passed 65%. His ocular blasts were now cutting, searing lasers of intense temperature. At first he'd worried when Hades' death power entered him, distracted and trying to expel it. But as the battle went on and Hades' strongest attacks failed to harm him, he stopped conserving energy as if facing an unbeatable foe. Hades, blocking the heat vision with an arm, abandoned his regal composure and flew at David like a furious, sinister bat, pouring out death power without restraint. David welcomed it. He didn't bother to parry. He met Hades fist to fist, letting the assaults land. Suspended under the broken ceiling of the grotto, David took the blows without yielding. Hades' death power felt insubstantial against him, even though it tore him and made him cough blood, constantly blasting him back with explosive shockwaves. Another heat ray struck. Hades was shoved back dozens of meters, gouging the grotto floor. A deep, bone-deep wound opened on his chest, and he was driven toward the gates of hell, the passage he'd escaped from. Hippolyta, her body petrified from the neck down, could only gasp and stare, incredulous. "He's stronger than before," she whispered. In the span of what to her was a few days, David's power had multiplied. He was even suppressing Hades himself. David had not yet unlocked the full measure of the Thanos-derived potential within him, but one consequence was already clear: immunity to the ravages of death. The idea came to him as he fired ray after ray from his eyes. In the Marvel multiverse, Thanos is a natural harbinger of death, an agent who maintains the balance between life and death, chosen by the cosmic entity called Death. As Death's harbinger, Thanos' affinity for that force far outranked an earthbound old god like Hades. When part of the Thanos template in David had activated during the fight with Brainiac, it had conferred upon him an unexpected ability: immunity to Death's corrosions. "Even if your power doesn't affect me, mortal," Hades groaned, "do not delude yourself that you can slay me." The god rose, battered and smoking, his gray-green death energy knitting his wounds. "Tell me, how do you kill a god of death?" he roared. David, crackling with lightning, admitted the truth. "I won't lie. Your power can't hurt me, but I can't kill you either." Hades controlled death itself. Ending such a god was harder than slaying ordinary divinities. His death power was exceptionally difficult for David to convert into an attack. "So I can only push you back to hell." He smiled. That would do. Let Hades brood impotently in the underworld. David could collect the emotional points. He glanced at Hippolyta and remembered the plot. Hades had escaped through the underworld passage, but could be sealed again if the key to the gate was destroyed. Hippolyta, finally recovering a scrap of awareness, shouted hoarsely, "Destroy the key and trigger the seal. Maybe we can still send him back." The key was crucial. She had always known it, but with her body frozen, she'd been unable to act. No one had reminded her until now. Hades' surprise at being resisted had left him careless. He had ignored the key. Seeing David stare at the ancient artifact embedded before the gates of hell, Hades' face twisted. "You dare not!" he bellowed, lunging to block him. Let him try, David thought. He let Hades crash into him, and then wrapped his arms around the god. As they headed for the grotto opening, he chuckled. "Did you forget something?" In the panicked widening of Hades' eyes, David flexed his hand in the air. A crushing gravitational field, as massive as mountains, slammed down and broke the key that anchored the underworld gate. It shattered into 3 pieces and then disintegrated. Earlier, David's gravity had not been enough to overcome Hades' divine protection, but the key itself had been specially forged to seal the passage and was not tainted by Hades' power. Now it lay in pieces. Golden, merciless light flared from the gate, and a tremendous suction targeted the Lord of the Underworld. Hades screamed as he was dragged backward. "Even if I'm pulled back, I'll take you with me." Hades snarled, trying to grab David. His hatred and desire for revenge at that moment eclipsed even his resentment of Zeus. To be defeated by a mortal was an unbearable humiliation. By what right? What gives you the strength to snatch at me? You are weaker than a woman. David mocked him outright, and with a simple shove, Hades felt an irresistible force wrench his arms apart. The long battle had drained David, but Hades had expended far more divine power. Without anything to hold on to, Hades slipped into the gate of hell like a man falling into an abyss, unable to resist the pull. "At least I'll take you with me, Hippolyta," he hissed, assuming he could grasp her as he was dragged down. "My brother's lover. I'll avenge my brother's humiliation on you." In his last instant, Hades reached with a monstrous skeletal hand toward the petrified queen. Her eyes widened in terror, but she could do nothing. "You won't have her," David said. He blasted Hades square in the chest with a searing heat beam. The god staggered, his grasp missed, and he was thrust a step farther into the momentum of the gate. Hades' final scream was swallowed by the roaring of the underworld as he was flung back into the nether flames. The gate slammed shut, the golden light vanished. Silence returned. "He's finally back in hell," Hippolyta whispered, pale and trembling. She had come so close to being dragged under. She looked at David with gratitude. "No need to thank me," he replied, calm. As Hades was shoved back, the dead he had summoned, the undead that did not belong in the mortal plane, were dragged back beneath the earth and sea. Even Cerberus, the three-headed hound that Clark had been battling, was pulled underground. Clark, bearing a few claw marks, climbed to his feet. "Is it over? David actually beat Hades?" The disappearance of Cerberus made it clear. The king of the underworld was gone. Faust, the sorcerer who had sought Hades' favor, had been tangled with Diana during the fight. He felt the magical shift and realized Hades was no longer in the world. The ultimate arcane truth Hades had promised him was probably gone too. Panic seized him. "Where can I run?" David said, appearing in midair. The bronze medallion Faust had used to petrify the Amazons vanished from the sorcerer's chest and clinked in David's hand. "You're just a pawn," David told him. "But because of you, the king of the underworld escaped, and the world nearly drowned in the dead." Faust stammered, sweating. He tried to put up a magical barrier, but the shield shattered like glass. David moved with terrible ease, seized Faust by the throat, and twisted. There was a dry crack. Faust's neck snapped. He died for his greed. As Faust's body went limp, the bronze medallion in David's hand grew hot and then inert. On Paradise Island, the petrified Amazons began to return to flesh and blood. They looked up to see their king hovering in the air. One by one they understood and fell to their knees in gratitude. "Respected Majesty," they intoned. "This artifact only kept them petrified while its user lived," Hippolyta explained to Diana. The spell collapsed when Faust died. David had intended to toss the medallion to the panting Diana so she and Hippolyta could work out how to remove any lingering magic, but the artifact had already done its work. He looked out across the ravaged island. The battlefield looked as if a giant had passed through it. Figures dropped from the sky, Batman and the others, having seen the undead being pulled back into hell on their way here. They took in the scene in silence, awkward and a little sheepish. They had thought they might finally stand beside Overman today to support him at last. As it turned out, their arrival had been too late. 197. "My name is Yamo Juo." "Then fire him and his entire team. They've burned through too much money and produced nothing. Luther Group doesn't need dead weight." The elevator chimed, and the click of high heels on marble announced the woman before she reached the top floor of Luther Tower. Dressed in a sharp business suit, she barked into her phone as she strode into the penthouse. "I don't care what Rex did in his lifetime or what strategic plan he left. Luther Group answers to me now." She ended the call, opened the office door, and found it dark. The smart lights failed to respond. She frowned and reached for the switch. From the darkness came a slow, deliberate round of applause. A silhouette sat behind the desk, moonlight outlining him. "Rex?" Her phone dropped from her hand. The CEO, Mossy, went pale, stepping back as if struck. The man behind the desk should have been dead. Her voice trembled. "Don't be afraid, Mossy. The one sitting here isn't some vengeful ghost." With a click, Rex Luthor turned on a desk lamp and revealed himself, hands steepled beneath his chin, amusement in his eyes. Impossible. You're dead. Mossy backed away until her spine met the wall. Overman killed you. Everyone saw the footage. The one who died was merely another me. A cold flash passed through his eyes. My likeness was created to reclaim a blood debt. Blood must be repaid with blood. Strictly speaking, Rex Luthor had died. The body was gone. What sat before her was a clone generated by the late Rex's contingency plan. He leaned back, appraising the woman who had run his empire in his absence, and spread his hands. Don't be afraid. You've run Luthor Group very well. Rex, Mossy stammered, trying to explain herself. He had heard her earlier. His tone was almost approving, which only made her more unsettled. Perhaps, a little too well. 38% of Luthor Group's shares are now in your name, making you the largest single shareholder. The words hit Mossy like a punch. She wanted to run, afraid he might tear her apart for having swallowed 2 generations of the family fortune. It's fine, she blurted. Rex waved a hand as if dismissing her fear. Actually, I should thank you. Thank you? Before you took over, I was forced to stay in the shadows. Men inside the company, all with their own agendas, were quietly siphoning assets. Before my death, Luthor Group was full of holes, on the brink of collapse. Then you stepped in. You purged the parasites and gave the company life again. You didn't let me down after I promoted you so young to a position just under me. Rex, I'll sign a transfer agreement and return the family's assets. Mossy's voice shook with the urgency of someone bargaining for her life. She had been a bat nesting near a snake. If she could be driven out and keep her life, she would take it. She also remembered glimpses of Rex's superhuman resistance to Overman before his death. There's no need to rush. Rex's smile faded. He folded his hands and fixed her with a colder look. No, there is something more important. Where is Dr. Anthony Ivo? Mossy's face went blank at the name. I fired him 2 months ago. You what? Rex rose so quickly his chair creaked. You fired him? He was one of the best scientists Luthor Group had, maybe the best on the planet. You actually let him go? I've been cutting costs, Mossy said, defensive. I eliminated unnecessary spending. He was a single man running an entire lab. His funding requests were unpredictable, his research went off in bizarre directions, and he never produced usable results. Rex stared at her in disbelief. The gratitude he had offered moments before vanished, replaced by contempt. You probably don't understand. Human history isn't shaped by people like you who dabble in cleverness. It's driven by geniuses the world can't fathom. He stood in the dim office and, before retreating into the shadows, left her with one measured warning. Remember what you should and shouldn't say. Tonight, you never saw a ghost named Rex Luthor. When the lightness of relief finally returned to her face and she convinced herself he had gone, Mossy breathed as if rescued from drowning. Down in a clandestine underground lab, Rex sat before a bank of screens. News footage rolled, headlines hailing Overman and the Justice League. Global scourge of the dead thwarted by Overman leading the League. Cyborg reveals mastermind behind attack was Hades. Clips played of Overman smiting monsters, toppling volcano-spawning demons, bringing down a lightning beast in Fawcett City, defeating Black Adam, battling interstellar mercenaries. A string of world-saving feats. Rex's jaw tightened. He clenched his fists until his knuckles went white. Since his death, Overman had saved Earth repeatedly. The strategy of the previous Rex, to use Overman as a scapegoat and turn public fear against him, had utterly failed. The hero had only grown in the eyes of the public with each crisis. God, fate, the universe, whatever force it was, seemed to conspire against him, giving Overman stage after stage to shine. Rex swept the laptop to the floor in a burst of anger. It was infuriating. The enemies he had not defeated in his previous life were only stronger now. Could a different Rex Luthor succeed where the last had failed? He needed an edge. He needed genius. Anthony Ivo, the one man described in the old files as an unparalleled technological mind. Rex pulled up the old dossiers, scanning them like a gambler hunting for the one card that could turn fortune around. If Ivo were alive, he might provide whatever breakthrough Rex needed. He traced the scientist's last known residence and went there himself. Meanwhile, by an autumn lake, David sat on a folding stool, baiting his line. The lake was emerald and still, ripples catching the low sun. The memory of the world's brush with catastrophe lingered. how hell nearly drained the sun, how people panicked, and how fear of the unknown had become humanity's deepest dread. People fear what they can't see or explain, he thought. Crises, even when resolved, left unease behind. The Justice League's every move was now watched, and that attention fed David in ways he barely admitted to anyone. Template integration, the slow accumulation of power and abilities tied to the world's emotional energy, had surged. He had only two major integration nodes left, 90% and 95%. One would grant Hyperion's supreme healing. He felt certain that at least one of them would make him functionally immortal. He let the thought settle as a sonic boom tore through the air. Clark landed beside him in a neat suit and square glasses, checking that no one was nearby. How did the interview go? Fine. David watched the water, thoughtful. Clark scratched the back of his neck. The last time he'd let his other life spill into his Kryptonian duties, his parents had confronted him at the dinner table. Clark, you're gifted. You hear and see things no one else can, but you're not a god. You can't do everything. His mother's concern had been genuine. Clark had been burning himself out, always Superman and never Clark Kent. David was blunt. Your parents are right. You don't owe the world constant vigilance. You weren't born to be humanity's 24/7 babysitter. Clark exhaled and smiled, the relief of small normalities returning. That's why I interviewed at the Daily Planet today. A job, Clark argued, was the first step toward being ordinary. As a reporter, he could legitimately investigate without raising suspicion. He could get close to people Superman never could. I hadn't finished college, he admitted, but he'd offered exclusive photos and stories, courtesy of some strategic use of his other self, and was hired as an intern. David watched him with the fond patience of someone who'd grown up with him. By the way, where's your dad? We always fish at this time in autumn. Uncle Rick's tractor broke down. Dad went to help. Clark fished a grin and sat down beside him. Let's see who catches more fish. It was an old Kent tradition, Jonathan and his two boys, competing by the water. Clark was always impatient back then and usually came in last. That had been the point. No superpowers, David said, noting Clark's sudden apprehension as he eyed David's tackle. Clark quickly agreed. Back in the city, Rex reached the shabby townhouse listed in Ivo's file. The door was closed. Inside, the place smelled like antiseptic and old oil. He followed a trail into a dim room where a body lay covered by a white sheet. Rex's expression hardened. The scientist's life was gone. How could you die? He muttered, the last hope choking off. A mechanical voice answered from the shadows. Who are you? Rex spun and found a tall, silver figure standing motionless in the half-light. Its form was humanoid, but clearly not human. Panels lined its limbs, and its face was placid, featureless, save for two glowing eyes. Who's there? Rex demanded. The android tilted its head. Hello, my creator is dead. My name is Amazo. Ladies and gentlemen. A calm, measured voice carried across the White House lawn. The White House spokesperson, a middle-aged man with glasses and hawk-like eyes, studied the assembled press. The recent sun crisis sparked intense debate across the nation. People in many states have begun to question the federal government's ability to protect them. Some have even suggested that civilian superhero organizations should replace the U.S. government and mediate international disputes to keep the world at peace. That idea is absurd, dangerous, and foolish. He struck the table amid a staccato of camera flashes. Superheroes operate outside the law, relying on dangerous technology and superpowered abilities. If such people were allowed to wield power and make their own rules, the United States and the world would slide into chaos. Overman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, if these are the greatest heroes on Earth, what does that make our soldiers, the men and women who, under the authority of the Constitution, have continuously protected our nation and preserved global order? He named the Justice League's icons and let his gaze sweep the crowd, indignation and passion in his tone, as if speaking for the millions of unsung service members. For a moment, no one spoke. The press exchanged uneasy looks. The White House had always been cautious about publicly weighing in on superheroes. Now, openly challenging their role felt like the first gust before a storm. Now, on behalf of the federal government, on behalf of the White House, and on behalf of the President, I present to you the true superheroes of the United States. It was a statement meant to set the record. The spokesperson turned and gestured behind him. Figures in armored battle suits descended from the sky, 4 people, men and women, white and black. These are the president's specially appointed federal super task force. First, the captain of this task force, Captain Atom. A man with a steel-bristled crew cut and an immovable mountain-like presence stepped forward. His skin shimmered with a silvery metallic glow. He was a man of few words. Major Force. A second soldier crossed his arms with a superior, almost sneering look. His body was an alternating sheet of purple and yellow metal, radiating a raw, intimidating power. Against the flashbulbs, some in the crowd were taken aback. Unlike Captain Atom's steady, military bearing, Major Force looked more like a villain than a serviceman. The spokesperson didn't pause for questions. Ji Tong, a young woman in black leather, curvy and defiantly sexy, chewed gum behind dark lipstick. She stepped forward like a student called to the front of a classroom. Arms folded, bored expression. She didn't look like a soldier or cop. She looked like a rebellious teen in a rock band. People wondered where the federal government had recruited her. Aside from Captain Atom, these choices were unexpected at best. And finally, Black Lightning. A powerful black man in yellow goggles and a blue and black suit marked by a lightning bolt strode forward, muscles packed like a heavyweight fighter. The crowd brightened at the familiar face. Reporters snapped every available frame, though the event left no room for interviews. Someone muttered, "Black Lightning used to be a street hero, didn't he?" It didn't take long for the audience to guess the White House's intent. This 4-person team was meant to rival the Justice League, ready to tackle supervillains at home and intervene overseas. But the League had a dozen-plus members. How could 4 people match them? As skeptical gazes swept Black Lightning's strong silhouette, people realized why he'd been included. The real focus, it seemed, would be the other 3. The spokesperson leaned in, voice low and emphatic. The Super Task Force reports directly to the White House and operates under the president's supreme authority. Most members have military training and can survive nuclear detonations in the millions or even tens of millions of tons of TNT. Their capabilities exceed the limits of ordinary technological detection. They are the federal government's strategic humanoid weapons. Survive a nuclear blast? The crowd erupted. Nuclear weapons were humanity's ultimate deterrent. For the White House to announce operatives who could endure a nuclear explosion was staggering. The spokesperson's careful wording, most, and the implication that aside from Black Lightning, the others could withstand such blasts, left the press reeling. How many Justice League members could brag of that? Overman, perhaps. But beyond him, who? What are their abilities? Someone asked. Now, I will introduce the task force's abilities one by one. The spokesperson enjoyed the reaction, smiling at the cameras with a triumphant curl to his lip. The era when individuals elevated themselves above the Constitution using their powers ends now. A cold villa sat hidden in the woods on a remote mountain. Lex, his genes altered, even as an embryo, by a previous version of himself, possessed hundreds of superpowers. His eyes flickered with supervision, and he made out the figure in the shadows, a silver, streamlined humanoid over 2 meters tall, smooth like cast iron, with a pair of small red camera-like eyes. Amazo? He said the name under his breath. It must be the nanorobot's model number. Anthony Evo had been a pioneer in nanotechnology. This could be his final work. On the bed lay Evo's corpse, one hand dangling from beneath the white sheet. Amazo moved forward, knelt, and gently picked up the hand, like a dutiful butler tucking a blanket back around a sleeping charge. Seeing that, Lex's guard relaxed a fraction. He was about to ask what Evo had intended with this creation. Amazo straightened and scanned him. Lex's face reflected across the robot's smooth visage. The robot raised its palm and, almost experimentally, made it erupt into flame, then become stone, then extend into blades and swords. "These are," Lex whispered. Amazo was displaying what it had copied, all of Lex's abilities. Amazo's interest waned after a few displays. He fixed his gaze on the corpse. "He hasn't paid attention to me for a long time," the robot said. Lex felt a pang of melancholy in that simple statement. Anthony Ivo had been a unique genius, now dead. "He will never wake up," Lex said. "Why?" Amazo asked, puzzled. "Professor usually wakes after 6 or 7 hours. It's been over 17. Do you miss him? So do I. Amazo's curiosity was childlike. It had only the vaguest understanding of the world. Lex laid a hand on the robot's shoulder and forced a sorrowful tone he didn't feel. But he is dead. He and I were the best of friends. Before he died, he told me that he had someone he wanted me to take care of and introduce to the world. He might have meant you. What is death? From now on, you will take care of me? Amazo asked. That's a complex question. I'll explain later. Lex kept his voice low. You must listen to me the way you listened to Professor. Take care of me the way you took care of him. Otherwise, I will fall into an eternal sleep like he did, and only you will remain. You are not like Professor. After a moment's observation, Amazo shook its head, and Lex's heart tightened. What's different? You are far stronger, Amazo said seriously. Yes, I am stronger than my best friend. Lex let out a private breath of relief and slipped his arm around Amazo's shoulder, guiding him to the window. Strength is relative. Let me tell you a story. A story? Once there was a young man who strove to build an empire, to craft a beautiful world. He endured countless hardships and nearly succeeded. Hatred flashed in Lex's eyes as he looked out. But very bad people tried to stop him. They attacked and persecuted him, and he was forced into hiding. Amazo seemed to follow, only partially. Lex hadn't expected that speaking in simple, almost childlike language would still leave gaps in the robot's comprehension. He dropped the pretense and spoke plainly. That young man was me. I will not be defeated. I will rebuild my empire from the ruins. My time is limited. I need someone I can trust to inherit everything I've built. He turned to Amazo. That someone is you. I will treat you like the son I never had. Amazo stared, bewildered and surprised, and pointed at himself. An empire? For him? Lex allowed a cold smile. My first step is to figure out how to defeat those who destroyed my life. Amazo considered, then said in a mechanical voice, Excellent. Lex's excitement was barely contained. Manipulation came naturally to him. This was easier than he'd imagined. Anthony Ivo's last creation, like a newborn left to him, might be the key to Lex's revenge, perhaps even to his domination of the world. Anthony told me about your replication program, but I don't know its limits, Lex asked. Professor said evolution has no limits. It just takes time. Amazo examined his hands. Having just copied many sets of ability data from you, I need time to build a model for their non-interfering operation. Needs time? Lex had expected amazement and immediate deployment. Hearing that Amazo needed time to integrate dozens or hundreds of power sets made him frown. For a machine to load and run hundreds of modules simultaneously without conflict is difficult. An artificial intelligence must learn to optimize. He felt, briefly, that this was his fault. If Amazo had replicated Overman's and Superman's powers, perhaps he wouldn't need so long to load a few powerful systems and could stack them against the heroes. Lex clenched his fist. His abilities, remarkable to ordinary humans, would be wasted if Amazo couldn't use them immediately. Still, there was nothing to be done. Anthony Ivo was dead. Lex could no longer ask whether the creation of Amazo had been serendipity or a final burst of genius. Either way, Lex's face hardened into something like hunger. It's good he's dead, he muttered. If he had lived, I wouldn't have had this chance for revenge. Overman, Superman, enjoy your ignorant, peaceful lives. Lex Luthor has risen from the ashes, and I will devour you all. This world will be mine. Buzz. On a small island between Metropolis and Gotham, the Justice League had covertly based their headquarters for nearly a year. Supersonic fighters roared through the sky like distant thunder. Armed helicopters circled above the island. Machine guns and missile pods were trained on the mountain peak that hid the League's base. Several figures in armored suits descended from the sky. Batman and Cyborg, on duty at the headquarters, were startled by the commotion. Batman's expression went hard when he saw the newcomers. He quickly sent out an alert. It seems someone's run out of patience and is making a move on us. Overman, Superman, there's a situation at headquarters. Some things left signs in the air long before they happened. Ever since the White House announced plans to create an official government superhero organization, Batman had known this day would come. 2 days after the press conference, after he'd watched a White House spokesperson declare that the era of individuals using their powers to place themselves above the Constitution was over, their deadline arrived. Out front of Justice League headquarters, a presidential task force stood behind a heavy cordon. Major Force strutted to the fore, and with all the arrogance of a man protected by executive authority, produced a search warrant stamped with the president's signature. Justice League, he announced, voice amplified by the media banked outside the line. This is a federal search warrant. We are here to search your base on suspicion of criminal activity. Firestorm looked as if he'd been slapped. Criminal activity? Are you kidding me? Major Force began to read, and Atom Captain continued, his voice flat and mechanical. Batman, you are accused of 374 federal felonies, including, but not limited to, intentionally causing grievous bodily harm, hit and run, manufacturing explosives, endangering public safety, trespassing, assaulting a police officer. And you, Firestorm, are accused of 103 federal felonies. Atom Captain rattled off list after list. Green Lantern, Element Woman, Cyborg, Hawkgirl, and others were cataloged in the same clinical tone. Even the lightest of the counts put each member in the dozens. Cyborg stepped forward, his face red with anger. We fought supervillains. We stopped robberies, kidnappings, city-world destruction. What do you expect us to do? Stand by and watch? That's the point, Atom Captain said coldly. You have no law enforcement authority. The warrant was tossed down like a gauntlet. Why isn't Batman speaking? Major Force taunted. Not going to defend yourself? Records show you're one of the masterminds behind a criminal organization calling itself the Justice League. Batman had stayed silent through the reading. He made no move now, standing rigid in the shadow of the Fenrir armor rising, unmanned, from the League helipad behind him. He did, however, speak when Major Force slid the warrant across the ground with a smirk. When the White House wants to make an example of people like us, Batman said, voice low, debate is useless. They make the laws. They can change them. A citizen's heroic act can be labeled a crime, and a criminal, someone guilty of rape and murder, can be given a presidential pardon, put on a task force, and called a public servant. Am I right, Clifford Zemeck? For the first time, Major Force looked off balance. He dropped his arms, eyes wide with mingled shock and fury. How do you know my name? That's classified. All my records are top secret. Jitong, the only woman in the squad, recoiled visibly at the name. Black Lightning went pale. He had once tried to join the Justice League. He'd seen their files. To learn one of his own team was a murderer, someone he'd spent his life fighting, shook him. Captain, he began. Atom Captain reached out to hold Major Force back. His face hardened. Knowing government secrets and sowing internal discord with a few words, Batman, you are remarkable. I might even believe you had the resources to acquire the zero metal necessary to make that Fenrir armor. He glanced at the suit hovering behind Batman. I'm very curious about who you are beneath that mask. Batman returned the look. I'm more curious about you. Major Force's criminal records are open until a certain point, until he was selected for a classified military experiment. After that, the files vanish. Yours, however, are blank. Your clearance exceeds Major Force's. You present yourself as an elite soldier, cold, rigid. How many years in Special Forces, Nathaniel? Atom Captain's jaw tightened. Batman chose not to mention the other two task force members whose histories were plain enough, a once famous street hero and a civilian. Major Force, who had benefited from a presidential pardon, interjected defensively. I'm not a criminal anymore, he snapped. The air tightened as more combat personnel in the helicopters and fighter jets above the city stirred uneasily. Atom Captain's voice carried, ironclad. See, they pardon and rebrand. They secure the papers and the narrative. Then thunder rolled over the sound of men arguing. The sky darkened. Violent air currents began to stir the clouds. From a distance, an approaching force dislodged the fighters' formation. Anxiety spread through the government ranks. That's Overman, someone shouted. He controls lightning. Black Lightning and Jitong grew silent, solemn. Major Force, for once, lost his swagger. Overman? Already a target? He muttered. We've got orders to investigate and apprehend him. It's good he's here, Atom Captain said with thin contempt. Saves us the trouble of finding him. Two figures broke the horizon in a blur of speed and abruptly halted over the island. The gusts from their flight rocked the fighter squadron like paper kites. Several jets went out of control, clipped each other, and exploded in midair. Pilots ejected and parachuted down, shaken but alive. Cyborg allowed himself a rare grin. In midair, Superman, Clark, nodded at Batman with the courtesy of a fellow veteran. Overman David stared instead at Atom Captain and the assembled government force. The two newcomers radiated different intensities of power. Together, their arrival made the whole situation feel suddenly dangerously small. David's presence alone rearranged the physics of the scene. His body exuded a repulsive field so vast that helicopters and fighters were pushed away like toys. Black Lightning threw his arms up and flung black currents at the force field, fighting to hold his ground, but the pressure shoved him back hundreds of meters. Within seconds, the government's aerial cordon was flung aside, leaving the task force members and the Justice League's defenders isolated beneath the two guardians in the sky. Atom Captain stood like a mountain of silver metal, rooted. Jitong hovered light as a shadow. Major Force swayed under the repulsive field, trying to resist. Then David's eyes flared with an awful concentrated energy. He unleashed beams that vaporized steel. Major Force was blasted away in a trail of sparks, clutching his chest as he skidded across the tarmac, screaming, "You dare stand before me and speak?" David's voice carried like thunder. There was a grim truth in Batman's next observation. Major Force was a crude imitation of Atom Captain. Where Nathaniel Adams' body had fused with alien metal and quantum energy under a top-secret experiment, an experiment that left him forged and classified, Clifford Zemeck had been the accidental, brutal byproduct of the government's attempt to replicate that process. Major Force was stronger than many metahumans, but in every way he was inferior to the original. Atom Captain met David's gaze and spoke reason and warning at once. "Overman, you're powerful enough to end this island if it comes to that. If you act, the collateral damage will be catastrophic. Cooperate with the investigation." "You could have acted sooner," David replied. "You have doubts about the White House's orders too, don't you?" His stare didn't flicker. Batman, feeling a flicker of hope at David's arrival, slipped into the Fenrir armor. He wanted to prevent a clash between two beings whose collision could devastate everything around them. He, Green Lantern, and the others would be little more than debris if those two started fighting. "Regulation isn't the issue," Atom Captain said. "If someone puts on a costume and starts deciding who lives and dies without accountability, the law must step in. You can't ignore that." The disagreement felt like tinder. Atom Captain's silver form shifted. He unleashed a fan-shaped tidal impact of energy designed to subdue everyone in its path. David didn't flinch. He absorbed the wave as if it were only a breeze and reached out. Where the energy met him, lightning gathered, an electric spear in his hand. And with a single, godlike motion, he grabbed a bolt from the sky and hurled it aside, the bolt screaming away into the clouds. Unlike the other supervillains he'd faced, Atom Captain had been a member of the Justice League in the comics, not inherently evil, just rigid and loyal to the U.S. government, a soldier who followed orders to the letter. Whether that made him good or bad didn't matter now. He stood against David, and he would show no mercy. Bang! Divine thunder condensed and shot at him, but Atom Captain simply swatted it away with the palm of his hand. His silver body looked as if it had been forged from the hardest substance in the universe. The lightning that vaporized steel hardly fazed him. Like a silver bolt, he streaked through the sky, roaring, and threw a punch at David. "This is the will of the country," David sneered. "Even some gods are as weak as mortals before you, and yet you choose to be a loyal dog." Two fists, each like a planet, met with earth-shattering force. Boom! The atmosphere detonated, milky white shockwaves tearing outward for hundreds of miles. The little island was ripped open as if by a Category 12 storm. Yellow-brown earth exposed, and the League's painstakingly built headquarters reduced to foundations. Batman and the others were flung like scraps of paper. Hal Jordan used his lantern ring to materialize a thick fortress, hoping to ride out the assault, but the next instant the wall shattered like foam under the blast. Flash, carrying the fragile Hal, dove behind a raised hill and both survived, faces drained of color as they watched the battle rage above them. The Fenrir armor had been pushed back hundreds of meters by the sheer force. Batman folded the armor's arms and scanned the ruined landscape. Anger flickered across his face and the suit broke the sound barrier, charging at Atom Captain. Every collision between David and Atom Captain shook the ground and sent roaring air blasts across the sky, scattering clouds. Batman had just surged forward when a backhand from Atom Captain flattened him and sent him flying. Major Force, don't just stand there. Atom Captain barked across the battlefield, regarding the trembling Major Force like a piece of trash. I'll hold over, man. You capture Batman and the others. Before Major Force could move, David's fist slammed into his face, sending him hurtling several hundred meters. David materialized like a thunderbolt in front of him. You should worry about yourself first. Creak. Another devastating blow made Atom Captain hear his jawbone protest like metal deforming. After that accident, I thought nothing could harm me again, he muttered, rubbing his chin in surprise. Turns out I was wrong. After the nuclear test that remade him, he had gained an indestructible silver body, able to shrug off physical attacks and nuclear blasts. Yet today, he'd felt his teeth rattle under someone's punch. In the comics, Atom Captain had said Superman's blows felt like someone pushing him. He could feel it, but it didn't hurt. David's strikes were different. They inflicted a kind of pain Atom Captain had rarely experienced. Energy flared. Two red and purple beams lanced from David's eyes, striking Atom Captain's chest. Powerful enough to cut through islands, the beams were absorbed by the silver body as if they had vanished into a bottomless abyss. I was disintegrated to atoms, fused with alien metal, and reassembled, Atom Captain boasted. Even the fury of a supervolcano bows before me. He opened himself to the quantum field and began to unleash an almost infinite barrage of energy beams. David's divine power and cosmic energy were swallowed easily. Atom Captain's energy absorption was more capable than he had imagined. Seeing the beams do little, David dodged and scowled. If I can't pierce him with energy, I'll have to do it with my fists. David amplified his body with cosmic energy, his speed and strength spiking. He charged with an aura like a meteor wrapped in lightning. For a moment, his thoughts flicked to Diana and the God-Killer sword. If she were here, maybe they could test whether the blade could cut Atom Captain. Then he remembered Atom Captain's firestorm-like ability to manipulate inorganic matter at the atomic level and wondered whether the sword itself could resist being changed. With the cosmic boost, David's physical advantage widened. Atom Captain, usually impervious, now felt bleeds and bruises as if wearing brass knuckles. He dared not get too close. Atom Captain's connection to the quantum field made his energy seemingly inexhaustible. In that regard, David was at a disadvantage. The battle reached an uneasy standoff. Each had strengths the other lacked. On the ground, Major Force obeyed the order and attacked Batman and the others. He easily tore through Hal Jordan's Green Lantern construct with one hand and blasted the charging Fenrir armor away. Flash, using his unfathomable speed, hammered Major Force with tens of thousands of blows in an instant. Major Force grinned at the assault. "Are you tickling me?" he taunted as he reached for Flash's legs. Then a sudden punch struck Major Force's back and sent him hurtling like a meteor into a distant hillside, where he crashed into the mud. As Major Force spat out clods of earth, he turned angrily toward Ji-Tong, the woman whose job it reportedly was to restrain Clark. Ji-Tong nonchalantly toyed with her hair. "He's too fast. I can't stop him," she said. "You!" Major Force snapped, furious and helpless. He couldn't land a blow on her. She was a federal fugitive, after all, and he reminded her with a grim face, "Capture the Justice League, and maybe the president will sign your pardon." "I don't need your reminders," Ji-Tong snapped back, running a hand through her hair irritably. "Sorry, Superman, I have no choice." She unleashed a punch toward Clark with the force of a 10-ton hammer. Clark dodged, his voice familiar and low. He knew this woman, this member of the White House task force, well enough. They had fought before in downtown Metropolis. "Why did you join the government task force, Ji-Tong?" he asked as he moved to help the others. Ji-Tong's attack carried a bitter edge. "You remember that bank robbery, right? A metahuman stealing in broad daylight? I can't live that way anymore." Clark recalled the day. An up-and-coming metahuman had knocked down guards and cracked a vault to steal a worthless brass necklace. He had pursued and tried to subdue her, only to find his blows and heat vision had no effect on her phantom-like state. The girl had been driven by desperation, stealing her dead mother's keepsake, because her abusive father wouldn't give it back. Clark had felt sympathy and let her go. After that, the government started watching me, Jitong said. They offered me food, rest, a normal life. I couldn't accept spending my days as a fugitive. I had no other choice. Clark's expression softened. I understand. It wasn't your fault. He didn't attack her while she fought. He simply helped take down Major Force. With Clark's involvement, Major Force, who had been dominating the League, suddenly faltered and fell back. Back in the sky, energy surged like a river, and David stood his ground as beams slammed into him. His skin scorched and he howled, but he gritted his teeth and seized an opening. He thundered forward and struck Atom Captain with a fist like a falling meteor. The blow broke Atom Captain's nose. His head spun and he tumbled backward. For the first time, Atom Captain thought, stunned as the pain registered. He clutched his nose. For a moment, he felt as if it had been sawed off. He had expected his energy defenses to shrug off everything, but the sight before him made his eyelids twitch. David was hurt, badly, burned as if thrown into the sun and clawing his way out, yet he hadn't fallen. What? Disappointed? Can't finish me with that? David snarled, standing where he'd been struck as the scorched flesh visibly knit itself back together. In the past few days, Hyperion's template fusion had advanced further. David's regenerative powers had increased. He now possessed near-immortal regeneration, layered on top of his divine lightning healing. Even if an opponent could suppress him temporarily, truly defeating him would be far harder. Atom Captain's face darkened. The wound to his own nose closed almost as quickly, and he fired an impact wave at David. Tough? I don't think this will be so tough. David knew Atom Captain's nature. Physiologically dead after a nuclear blast, his current form reassembled and sustained by quantum energy linked to the quantum field. That connection granted him seemingly infinite energy, but every advantage had a price. The right of maintaining that connection was a constant struggle. The more severe his injuries, the harder it became to hold his reassembled body together. If he ever sustained too much damage, he could lose control and detonate like an enormous nuclear bomb. David summoned divine lightning to accelerate his healing. Like a supernova, he blasted through Atom Captain's barrage of beams and closed the distance, his fists slamming into the silver body with devastating force. If he keeps reassembling himself, it will drain him. Eventually, the quantum field can't hold him together.